The medals felt heavy on William Harrington's chest. 40 years of service condensed into small pieces of metal and ribbon. He adjusted his dress uniform one final time before the mirror. At 62, his face had earned every line that mapped across it. Eyes that had seen 3 wars stared back at him, deep blue and unwavering despite the decades. His silver hair was still cut to regulation, a habit he would likely carry to his grave. "One last ceremony," he muttered to the empty hotel room. "Then it's fishing and whiskey until they put me in the ground." Fort Knox gleamed under the Kentucky sun as Harrington drove through the gates one final time. Tanks from every era of American military history lined the approach to the Patton Museum, sentinels of steel chronicling the evolution of armored warfare. Harrington slowed as he passed an M1A1 Abrams, the same model he'd commanded during Operation Desert Storm. The sight of it still stirred something primal in his chest. To most people, it was simply a machine. To William "Iron Bill" Harrington, it had been home. The ceremony was being held in the main auditorium, already filling with officers, enlisted men, and dignitaries by the time he arrived. Harrington recognized faces from each chapter of his career. Men who had been young lieutenants under his command now wore the insignia of colonels and generals. Boys he'd taught to fight were now teaching the next generation. His legacy in steel. "There he is," boomed a voice that could only belong to Major General Thomas Martinez. Still barrel-chested at 65, with a mustache that defied regulation and gravity, the man who refused to die or retire. The two men embraced, a friendship forged in the fires of Kuwait 3 decades earlier. "Had to happen eventually, Tom," Harrington replied, clapping his old friend on the shoulder. "Even iron rusts." Martinez's face grew serious. "They don't make them like you anymore, Bill. These kids today, raised on video games, thinking war is something you control with a joystick from 10,000 miles away. Every generation says that about the next. My old man thought we were soft because we had air conditioning in our tanks." The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance the Army could muster. Speeches extolled the career of Colonel William Harrington, from his early days as a young lieutenant patrolling the inner German border during the Cold War, through the sandstorms of Desert Storm, to his final posting as senior tactical advisor at the Armor School. 40 years of service distilled into a 20-minute highlight reel that could never capture the reality of those decades. Harrington sat ramrod straight, eyes forward, the perfect image of a soldier. But his mind wandered to faces not present, the men who never made it home, the crews he'd lost in battles across the globe, the wife who had stood by him through deployments and moves, only to lose her own battle with candor 5 years earlier, the son who wore the same uniform but hadn't spoken more than necessary words to his father in years. As the current commandant of the Armor School approached the podium for the final presentation, an aide hurried in from the side entrance. He whispered urgently to General Martinez, whose face transformed instantly from ceremonial pleasantness to grim focus. Martinez stood and crossed quickly to the commandant, interrupting the proceedings with a whispered conference. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Military men recognized the signs of urgent news. Harrington felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the soldier's intuition that had kept him alive through decades of conflict. The commandant nodded grimly and returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but we must cut today's ceremony short due to a developing situation requiring immediate attention. Colonel Harrington, if you would please join General Martinez and myself backstage." As the audience began to stir with questions, Harrington rose and followed the 2 senior officers through a side door. In a small conference room, a secure video feed was already connected to the Pentagon. On screen, the stern face of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs waited impatiently. "Colonel Harrington," the chairman began without preamble, "I apologize for interrupting your retirement ceremony, but we have a situation developing in the Middle East. Approximately 3 hours ago, a new type of drone swarm attack decimated a tank battalion operating near the Syrian border. Initial reports indicate nearly total loss of vehicles and significant casualties." Harrington's mind instantly shifted to operational mode, decades of training taking over. "Sir, what kind of drones are we talking about? Commercial quadcopters with improvised explosives?" "Negative, Colonel. These appear to be something entirely new. Supersonic radar evading with penetrating munitions specifically designed to target armored vehicles. The survivors report they never even saw them coming until tanks started exploding." Martinez handed Harrington a tablet with preliminary imagery. The smoking husks of M1A2 Abrams tanks, their turrets blown clean off, ammunition compartments detonated from precision strikes that bypassed even the advanced armor of America's premier battle tank. How is this possible? Harrington asked, his tactical mind already analyzing the attack patterns. Even the most advanced anti-tank missiles leave distinct damage patterns. This looks like something punched through exactly where it wanted to. That's precisely why we're calling you in, Colonel, the chairman continued. Before your retirement paperwork processes, we're activating you for one final mission. We need your expertise on a classified project. Harrington was about to ask for clarification when Martinez placed a hand on his shoulder. Unusually heavy. Bill, Martinez said quietly, there's something else you need to know. The 4th Armored Brigade is scheduled for deployment to that same region next month. The words hung in the air for a moment before their full meaning penetrated Harrington's consciousness. Michael's unit, he said, his voice suddenly hollow. Martinez nodded. Your son's tank battalion will be rolling into that exact area in 30 days. The room seemed to tilt slightly as Harrington absorbed this information. Captain Michael Harrington, his son, his only child, a tank commander like his father, though they had barely spoken since Elizabeth's funeral, now scheduled to deploy into a zone where an unknown weapon had just proven capable of destroying America's most sophisticated tanks as if they were made of paper. What exactly do you need from me, sir? Harrington asked the chairman, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. We need you to help us solve this problem before more American soldiers die. A transport is waiting to take you to White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. You'll be briefed further upon arrival. Time is critical, Colonel. As the video conference ended, Harrington stood motionless, processing the implications. His retirement would wait. His fishing rod would gather dust a while longer. Because somewhere in the Middle East, American tanks were burning, and soon his son would be commanding one into that same hellfire. Martinez gripped his shoulder again. I'm sorry about the timing, Bill. But if anyone can figure this out. I need to call Michael, Harrington interrupted. Security protocols, Bill. No contact until we know what we're dealing with. The mission is classified Zulu level. Harrington's jaw tightened. Then I need to get to New Mexico. Now. Within the hour, Harrington found himself aboard a military transport aircraft. His dress uniform exchanged for standard ACUs, his retirement ceremony replaced by the beginning of one final mission. As the plane lifted into the darkening sky, he stared out the window at Fort Knox receding below, the home of American armor growing smaller until it vanished from sight. Just like his plan for retirement, just like his chance to reconcile with his son before Michael deployed, just like the American tanks in the Middle East, here one moment, gone the next. 40 years of military service had taught William Harrington many things, but it had never taught him how to fail. And with his son's life now hanging in the balance, failure had become something he could not accept, no matter the cost. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Project. White Sands Missile Range stretched across the New Mexico desert like a scar on the earth, its boundaries containing decades of America's most classified weapons programs. As the helicopter carrying Harrington descended toward a cluster of buildings nestled against a mountain range, he noted how isolated the facility appeared. No flags flew, no identifying markers, just nondescript buildings surrounded by layers of security. Perfect for something the government wanted to hide, even from itself. A woman waited on the landing pad, her dark hair whipping in the rotor wash. Despite the desert heat, she wore a white lab coat over tactical pants and boots, the incongruous combination suggesting someone who moved between worlds. As Harrington stepped onto the tarmac, she approached with an outstretched hand. Colonel Harrington, I'm Dr. Sarah Reynolds. Welcome to Olympus Station. Her grip was firm, her eyes direct. Harrington estimated her to be in her mid-40s, with streaks of premature gray at her temples and the focused intensity of someone who had dedicated their life to a singular purpose. Doctor, I was told I'd be briefed on arrival about the situation in the Middle East. Reynolds nodded. Walk with me, Colonel. Time isn't our ally. She led him through a series of security checkpoints, each more stringent than the last. Retinal scanners, hand geometry readers, voice pattern analysis. Whatever was housed in this facility, the government considered it among its most valuable secrets. Olympus Station doesn't officially exist, Reynolds explained, as they entered an elevator that began a surprisingly long descent into the earth. It was established in 2004 as a black-budget research facility following certain events during the Iraq War that revealed critical vulnerabilities in our armored forces. I'm familiar with those vulnerabilities, Doctor. I lost 3 tanks in my battalion to improvised weapons that shouldn't have been effective against Abrams' armor. Reynolds gave him an appraising look. Then you'll understand why this place was created, to ensure it never happened again. The elevator doors opened to reveal an enormous underground complex much larger than the surface building suggested. A cavernous main chamber housed what appeared to be multiple testing ranges, laboratory spaces, and at the center, a large object covered by a tarp. "Welcome to Project Phoenix," Reynolds said, leading him toward a conference room where several people waited. "America's answer to the evolving threats against our armored supremacy." Inside the conference room, a tall, athletic man in his late 40s stood as they entered. His uniform bore the insignia of a full colonel, and his bearing suggested Special Forces background rather than armor branch. "Colonel James Wilson, Special Projects Oversight." He introduced himself with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard a lot about the legendary Iron Bill Harrington." Something in Wilson's tone set Harrington's nerves on edge. There was history here he wasn't aware of yet. "This is Master Sergeant Kevin Rodriguez," Reynolds continued, indicating a stocky Hispanic man in his 30s with scarred hands and the watchful eyes of a combat veteran. "Our chief systems integrator and mechanical genius." "Doc Rodriguez, sir," the sergeant said, shaking Harrington's hand. "Any tank man knows the difference between coming home or not is having a good mechanic. I keep the experimental stuff running when the engineers say it can't be fixed." The final member of the group was a civilian analyst who monitored intelligence feeds, but it was clear the core team consisted of Reynolds, Wilson, and Rodriguez. Reynolds activated a secure display, and the room darkened as images of destroyed American tanks filled the screen. 3 hours ago, 12 M1A2 Abrams tanks were destroyed in less than 7 minutes by a previously unknown weapon system, she began. The attack came without warning. No missile launches detected, no aircraft in the vicinity. First indication of attack was when tanks began to explode. Wilson took over. Survivors report hearing a high-pitched sound moments before impact. Analysis of damage patterns indicates penetration at specific vulnerability points, not widely known outside of classified engineering documents. Harrington studied the images carefully. These aren't lucky hits. Whatever did this knew exactly where to strike. Turret ring, commander's hatch seam, engine intake. These are precision attacks against known weak points, which suggests either a significant intelligence breach or a weapon system with advanced targeting AI, Reynolds continued. Infrared analysis of the impact sites shows temperatures consistent with hypersonic penetration. These aren't conventional warheads. They're using kinetic energy alone to defeat the armor. "Like firing a bullet made of tungsten from space," Rodriguez added. "No explosives needed when you're hitting with that kind of velocity." Harrington connected the dots quickly. "You're talking about drone swarms with hypersonic kinetic penetrators, but that's theoretical technology. Nobody has successfully weaponized that combination." The room fell silent as Reynolds and Wilson exchanged looks. "Nobody is supposed to have it," Wilson corrected. "But 10 years ago, we nearly did. That's why you're here, Colonel." Reynolds dimmed the lights further and activated a historical presentation. In 2013, DARPA initiated Project Phoenix to develop the next generation of mobile air defense for mechanized units. The concept was simple. As drone technology evolved, our tanks would become increasingly vulnerable. We needed a countermeasure that could move with our armored forces. The screen showed conceptual designs for a vehicle that made Harrington sit up straighter. It was essentially a modern version of something he recognized immediately. "That's a flak panzer," he said, using the German term for tank-based anti-aircraft systems from World War II. Reynolds smiled slightly. "You know your history, Colonel." "Yes, the concept dates back to German designs from 1944-45. The Zerstorer and Ostwind the Sikkim were their most advanced prototypes, though neither made it into full production before the war ended. Project Phoenix sought to update this concept with modern technology," Wilson continued. "A mobile air defense platform based on the Abrams chassis capable of detecting, tracking, and destroying multiple aerial threats simultaneously while keeping pace with armored formations." Harrington's tactical mind immediately grasped the value. Current air defense systems either lack mobility or protection. This would fill a critical gap. "What happened to the project?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Budget cuts," Wilson said flatly. 2 years ago, the entire program was shelved in favor of network-centric drone defense concepts. The physical prototypes were mothballed, the team reassigned, except for a skeleton crew to maintain the research database. "And now someone has developed the exact weapon this system was designed to counter," Harrington concluded. Precisely, Reynolds confirmed. The attack profile we witnessed is consistent with what our threat assessment team predicted 5 years ago. A drone swarm using hypersonic kinetic penetrators against known tank vulnerabilities. Rodriguez spoke up. They built exactly what we feared, while we abandoned our defense against it. Harrington processed this information, his military mind already calculating options and timelines. So you want to revive Project Phoenix. How close was it to completion when it was shut down? We had two functioning prototypes, Reynolds said. The Thunderbolt, modeled after the German Zerstörer concept with a multi-barrel autocannon system, and the Vanguard, based on the Ostwind II with twin high-velocity cannons. Both had achieved approximately 70% of their performance targets before funding was cut. And how quickly can they be made operational? Harrington pressed. That's the problem, Wilson interjected. We estimate 3 to 4 months to restore full functionality, test and deploy. Your son's unit deploys in 30 days. The blunt assessment hung in the air. Michael would be in the combat zone long before any defense could be developed. Then we work faster, Harrington has said simply. Reynolds exchanged another look with Wilson before responding. Colonel, there's something else you should know. You weren't chosen for this project simply because of your experience or your personal connection to the upcoming deployment. She activated another secure file. Images appeared on screen that caused Harrington's blood to run cold. Operation Hellhound, he said quietly. Wilson studied him carefully. So you do remember. Every day of my life, Harrington replied, his voice suddenly heavy with memory. The screen showed classified footage from 1991 during the Gulf War. An experimental vehicle based on an Abrams chassis with a modified weapon system engaging Iraqi aircraft. The test had gone catastrophically wrong, resulting in the death of 3 American soldiers when the system malfunctioned. You were there, Reynolds said. It wasn't a question. I was the commanding officer, Harrington confirmed, his eyes fixed on the old footage. It was the first attempt at this concept during actual combat conditions. We thought we had accounted for all variables. What exactly happened? Rodriguez asked. The full report is still redacted beyond our access level. Harrington hadn't spoken about that day in decades. The memories carefully locked away alongside so many others from his years of service. But now, with his son's life potentially hanging in the balance, those memories might hold the key to preventing history from repeating itself. Hellhound was a field modification authorized under emergency conditions, he began, his voice taking on the practiced detachment of an after-action report. Iraqi air attacks were causing significant casualties among our mechanized units. The brass authorized an experimental weapons system to be mounted on an Abrams platform, a 30mm Gatling system with experimental tracking radar. The images on screen showed exactly that, a crude but functional prototype of what would later evolve into Project Phoenix. We deployed against a squadron of Iraqi Hind helicopters attacking our supply lines. The system initially performed beyond expectations, downing 2 helicopters in the first engagement. But during the second engagement, the tracking system locked onto a friendly A-10 Thunderbolt. The override failed. The weapon fired automatically. Harrington paused, the weight of that moment still heavy after all these years. The A-10 survived, but the weapon system overheated and catastrophically malfunctioned. The ammunition cooked off inside the turret. 3 crew members were killed instantly. I survived because I was outside the turret, coordinating with infantry. The project was classified and buried, Wilson finished, until it was revived under Phoenix a decade later, with the lessons of Hellhound supposedly incorporated into the new design. Reynolds stepped closer to Harrington. Colonel, you're the only officer still active with direct experience of both the potential and the pitfalls of this weapons concept. That's why you're here, not just for your son, but because you've seen firsthand what happens when we get this wrong. Harrington finally looked away from the screen, the ghosts of his past temporarily subdued by the urgency of the present. Show me the prototypes, he said. Let me see what we have to work with. Reynolds led the group out of the conference room and into the main chamber where the tarp-covered object waited. With a nod from her, technicians pulled away the covering to reveal what lay beneath. The Vanguard prototype gleamed under the harsh facility lights. Built on a modified Abrams chassis, its conventional turret had been replaced with an angular, low-profile design housing twin 35mm cannons. Radar arrays and sensor packages bristled from its surface, giving it the appearance of a predatory creature rather than a machine. Beside it sat the partially disassembled Thunderbolt, its multi-barrel Gatling system removed for maintenance. The turret splayed open like a patient in surgery. 70% complete, you said? Harrington asked, already walking around the vehicles, assessing their design with a veteran tanker's eye. The hardware is mostly functional, Reynolds explained. It's the targeting systems and fire control software that need the most work. After the project was defunded, key AI development was halted. Harrington climbed up onto the Vanguard, muscle memory from decades in tanks making the ascent automatic despite his age. He dropped down into the commander's position, hands running over the controls, mind already calculating modifications and improvements. How many people still have security clearance to work on this project, he asked. 17, Wilson replied, plus you now, a fraction of the original team. I'll need complete access to the archives, Harrington continued. Every test report, every failure, every proposed modification. And I want access to the Hellhound files too, including the sections redacted from your copies. Wilson stiffened slightly. Those files require Joint Chiefs approval. Then get it, Harrington said, not looking up from his inspection of the fire control system. If we're going to make this operational in under 30 days, we can't afford to repeat mistakes already made. As he familiarized himself with the prototype systems, Harrington became aware of Reynolds watching him with an unreadable expression. Something on your mind, Doctor? He asked. You should know that reviving this project isn't just about technical challenges, she said quietly, ensuring Wilson and Rodriguez couldn't overhear. There are political and corporate interests that preferred Phoenix remain buried. Such as? Black Sphere Technologies has a competing drone defense system in development. Less effective, but far cheaper. They've lobbied extensively against vehicle-based solutions like ours. Harrington nodded, understanding immediately. The military-industrial complex had its own agenda, often at odds with what frontline soldiers actually needed. I don't care about politics or corporate profits, he said simply. I care about keeping American soldiers alive, including my son. Reynolds seemed to make a decision. After the briefing, meet me in Archive Room 3. There's something you should see that isn't in the official files. Before Harrington could question her further, Wilson approached with a tablet displaying a project timeline. I've drafted a preliminary schedule, Wilson explained. Even working around the clock, the earliest we could have a functioning prototype ready for field testing would be 28 days from now. 2 days before Michael's deployment, cutting it dangerously close. That's not good enough, Harrington replied. We need a functional system ready for integration training in 20 days. The remaining time will be needed for the crews to learn the system. That's impossible, Wilson objected. The software integration alone. Nothing is impossible when American lives are at stake, Colonel, Harrington cut him off. If we fail, we're sending more sons and daughters into battle without adequate protection. I won't accept that, neither should you. Wilson's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. With a curt nod, he departed to make the requested arrangements. As the team dispersed to begin work, Rodriguez remained behind with Harrington, watching him continue to examine the prototype. You really think we can get this beast combat ready in 20 days, sir? The sergeant asked. Harrington gazed up at the imposing silhouette of the Vanguard, a modern incarnation of a concept born in the desperate final days of Nazi Germany, now America's best hope against a threat that had already proven lethal. We don't have a choice, Sergeant, he answered. The enemy isn't waiting, and neither is the deployment schedule. As Rodriguez nodded and departed to begin work on the Thunderbolt systems, Harrington climbed out of the turret and stood alone beside the machine that represented both America's vulnerability and its potential salvation. In his mind's eye, he saw not the sterile test facility, but the burning hulks of Abrams tanks in the desert. And in those tanks, he saw not anonymous crews, but his son Michael trapped inside as hypersonic penetrators punched through supposedly impenetrable armor. He placed a hand on the cold metal of the Vanguard's hull, a silent promise to the machine and to his distant son. We will not fail. Chapter 3. The New Threat. Archive Room 3 was buried deep within the facility's classified information section, its entrance requiring both Reynolds' biometric data and a rotating cipher code. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, climate control precisely maintained to preserve decades of paper records deemed too sensitive for digital storage. Why bring me to the archives? Harrington asked as Reynolds closed the heavy door behind them. I thought all the Phoenix files were digitized. The official ones were, she replied, moving to a section marked with a simple red stripe. But some information never made it into the official record. She pulled out a dusty binder labeled Ancestor Analysis, German Flak Development 1944-45, and laid it on a reading table. When Phoenix began, I led a historical analysis team studying the original German designs, she explained, opening the folder to reveal meticulously preserved technical drawings, some bearing the original eagle and swastika, insignia of the Third Reich. The Zerstörer and Ostwindeck programs were more advanced than commonly believed. Harrington studied the diagrams with professional interest. The German engineers had encountered and solved problems that still plagued modern weapons developers. The oscillation damping system, he noted, pointing to a particular schematic, that's remarkably sophisticated for 1945 technology. Reynolds nodded. Exactly. The Germans solved a critical issue with multi-barrel stability during sustained fire that we're still struggling with. But here's what's interesting. The most advanced elements of their design were never implemented because the war ended. The knowledge was scattered. She turned to another section, this one containing documents with Soviet markings. After the war, both America and Russia captured German engineers and documents. We got some, they got others. Neither side got the complete picture. Until now, Harrington guessed. Until now, she could affirm. 5 years ago, while researching for Project Phoenix, I discovered that the Russians had conducted their own experiments based on the Ostwind II designs during the Cold War. Their project was called Uragan Hurricane. It was abandoned due to cost, but not before they solved several key engineering problems. How did you get Soviet classified research? Reynolds smiled thinly. Let's just say not all Russian scientists are satisfied with their compensation. She pulled out another file, this one modern and bearing the Phoenix Project designation. When I incorporated these findings into Phoenix, we made a quantum leap forward in stabilization systems. But then I found something that concerned me deeply. The file contained surveillance photographs of a desert testing range. The images were grainy, but clearly showed a vehicle with a similar profile to the Phoenix prototypes. Where were these taken? Harrington asked, studying the unfamiliar landscape. These came from intelligence sources last year, after Phoenix was already defunded, Reynolds explained. They show a testing facility in a region I'm not cleared to name explicitly, but what matters is what they were testing. She pointed to the vehicle in the image. They've combined elements of both German designs with modern technology, just as we did, but they've taken a different approach to the weapon system. Harrington looked closer and saw what appeared to be launch tubes rather than conventional cannons. They're using it as a drone launcher, not a gun platform, he realized. Precisely. They've created what we've designated Black Orbit, a mobile launch platform for hypersonic kinetic kill vehicles, small radar-evading drones that accelerate to over Mach 5 before impact. The pieces connected in Harrington's mind. The attack in the Middle East. Reynolds nodded grimly. The timing can't be coincidental. Phoenix gets defunded, and 2 years later, our adversaries deploy the exact weapon it was designed to counter. You think we have a leak, Harrington stated rather than asked. I think we have something worse, Reynolds replied. I think we have a deliberate effort to ensure American tanks remain vulnerable. The question is why, and by whom. She closed the files and returned them to their secured location before continuing. Colonel Wilson has been pushing alternative drone-based defense systems since he arrived 6 months ago. Systems that have repeatedly failed in testing against the exact threat profile we just witnessed in action. You don't trust him, Harrington observed. I trust evidence, she replied carefully. And the evidence suggests that certain people have worked very hard to keep Phoenix grounded, while alternatives that don't actually work are promoted. Before Reynolds could elaborate further, her secure phone buzzed with an alert. We need to get back, she said after checking the message. They've called an emergency briefing, new intelligence about the attack. They made their way quickly back to the main conference room, where Wilson was already waiting with Rodriguez and several intelligence analysts. The atmosphere was tense. We've identified the weapon system, Wilson announced as they entered. Confirm your security clearances. After each person present had authenticated their identity and clearance level, Wilson activated the secure display. Satellite imagery appeared, showing a convoy of vehicles moving through a mountain pass. Among them was a distinctive vehicle matching the profile in Reynolds' classified files. This image was captured approximately 6 hours before the attack on our tanks, Wilson explained. NSA has designated the weapon system as Cauldron. It's a mobile drone launcher using a modified tank chassis. Each vehicle carries up to 40 kinetic penetrator drones with an operational radius of 100 miles. Harrington studied the image intently. How many of these systems have been deployed? Intelligence estimates at least 6 operational units, one of the analysts responded, with production capability for 2 additional units per month. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Even a single cauldron system had proven devastating against American armor. 6 such systems could potentially neutralize the majority of America's deployed tank force. What countermeasures do our current units have? Harrington asked. Wilson's expression was grim. Essentially none. The drones are too small and too fast for conventional air defense systems. By the time they're detected, impact occurs within seconds, which is exactly what Phoenix was designed to prevent, Reynolds added pointedly. Wilson acknowledged this with a reluctant nod. Current Pentagon assessment gives us 3 weeks before cauldron systems could be deployed against the 4th Armored Brigade's area of operations. 3 weeks, 7 days before Michael's unit would be in range. Then we have our timeline, Harrington said firmly. 20 days to make Phoenix operational. Wilson began to object, but Harrington cut him off. I understand the technical challenges, Colonel, but we aren't discussing theoretical deployment schedules anymore. American lives are at stake right now. My son's life is at stake. The mention of Michael's situation created an uncomfortable silence in the room. Personal connections weren't supposed to influence military decisions, but everyone present understood the human reality underlying their work. There's something else you should see, Rodriguez said, breaking the tension. He activated another file on the display system, this one showing technical analysis of debris recovered from the attack site. We managed to recover fragments of one of the kinetic penetrators, he explained. The metallurgical analysis is concerning. The screen displayed a microscopic view of the metal's crystalline structure alongside a chemical composition chart. Reynolds leaned forward, her scientific interest clearly piqued. That's a tungsten carbide core with a carbon nanotube lattice structure. We've been experimenting with similar materials, but this is more advanced than anything we've successfully produced. The guidance chipset fragments contain American-sourced components, Rodriguez added quietly. The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. You're suggesting American technology was used to create these weapons? Harrington asked. Not just American technology, Reynolds responded, her voice tight with controlled anger. This is almost identical to the penetrator design we were developing for Phoenix as a test target before the project was defunded. Wilson's face remained carefully neutral. That's a serious accusation, Doctor. There could be numerous explanations for the similarities. Name one that doesn't involve security breaches, she challenged. Before the brewing confrontation could escalate, Harrington interrupted. The origin of the technology can be investigated while we work. Right now, our priority is developing a countermeasure. He turned to Rodriguez. Based on this analysis, can our current Phoenix prototype effectively engage these drones? The sergeant considered for a moment. The Thunderbolt system would struggle with the speed profile. Its tracking systems were designed for conventional aircraft and missiles. But the Vanguard, he paused, calculating. The twin 35mm system, using proximity-fused ammunition, might create enough of a defensive envelope to neutralize incoming penetrators, if we can solve the targeting acquisition challenge. And that's a big if, Wilson added. Our targeting AI was only 60% effective against much slower targets in the last round of testing. Then we need to improve it, Harrington said simply. Dr. Reynolds, I want you to focus on the targeting systems. Sergeant Rodriguez, begin restoring the Vanguard prototype to operational status. I'll review all test data and operational parameters to identify improvement opportunities. He turned to Wilson. Colonel, we need additional resources. Personnel, materials, computational power. Whatever can be diverted without compromising operational security. Wilson studied him for a long moment before responding. I'll see what I can do, but be aware that this project remains technically deactivated. We're operating in a gray zone with limited official support. Then we'll make do with what we have, Harrington replied. I've accomplished more with less during 3 wars. This is just another battlefield with different weapons. As the meeting dispersed, Harrington remained behind, studying the images of the cauldron system and the wreckage of American tanks. His military mind analyzed angles of attack, deployment options, vulnerability points, but another part of him, the father rather than the soldier, kept seeing his son's face in the commander's hatch of a burning Abrams. Reynolds paused at the door. Colonel, there's something personal I should mention. Your security clearance update included your medical records. Harrington stiffened slightly. What about them? The cardiac issues noted in your last physical. Are you managing them adequately? He hadn't expected this line of questioning. His heart problems had been a closely guarded secret, known only to his doctors and the necessary military medical authorities. A minor heart attack 2 years ago, followed by stent placement and medication. Controlled but always present, like a time bomb ticking in his chest. My condition won't interfere with this mission, he stated flatly. Reynolds held his gaze. I need to know if you're at risk, Colonel. Not just for the project, but because I've seen what stress does to people with your condition. Something in her tone made Harrington pause. There was personal knowledge there, not just professional concern. My husband was a contractor in Iraq, she said, answering his unspoken question. Heart attack in the green zone, 2007. They said it was the stress and the heat. He was 42. Harrington's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss, doctor, but I assure you I'm closely monitored and medicated. I won't collapse on you. She didn't seem entirely convinced, but nodded acceptance. We'll need you at full capacity, Colonel. This project has always operated on the razor's edge of possible and impossible. As Reynolds departed, Harrington turned back to the intelligence displays, his mind already formulating the strategies and modifications that might make the impossible deadline achievable. But in the back of his mind, a dull pressure in his chest reminded him that Reynolds' concerns weren't unfounded. He reached into his pocket for the small pill stickies that accompanied him everywhere, dry swallowing a medication that helped keep his damaged heart functioning. One more battle to fight, one more enemy to overcome. The stakes had never been higher, both professionally and personally. Outside in the main chamber, work had already begun on the Vanguard prototype. Rodriguez directed a small team of technicians removing access panels and diagnostic equipment word to life. Reynolds had disappeared into the software lab where the targeting AI would need to be completely overhauled. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, the Cauldron systems continued to hunt for American armor. While Michael Harrington prepared his tank company for deployment, unaware that his father was now in a race against time to ensure he wouldn't face those weapons unprotected. Harrington squared his shoulders and moved toward the prototype. Time to get to work. The old soldier in him understood the near impossibility of what they faced. The father in him refused to accept failure as an option. Dawn broke over White Sands Missile Range, painting the desert in hues of amber and gold. The beauty was lost on Colonel William Harrington, who stood in the observation bay overlooking the main workshop floor. He hadn't slept. The digital countdown clock mounted on the wall read 59:17:43. 59 days, 17 hours, and 43 minutes until his son's unit deployed. 20 days until their self-imposed deadline to have a functioning prototype. The facility had transformed overnight. What had been a mothballed research station was now a hive of frantic activity. Technicians swarmed over the Vanguard prototype like surgeons around a critical patient. Dr. Reynolds hadn't left the software lab, her team working in shifts to revive and enhance the targeting algorithms. And somewhere in the complex, Colonel Wilson was supposedly securing additional resources, though Harrington had seen little evidence of success thus far. Harrington sipped black coffee from a metal thermos, a habit from decades of military life. The bitter liquid did little to dispel his fatigue, but it maintained the illusion of alertness. His body ached from age and old wounds, a symphony of pain that had become such a constant companion he barely acknowledged it anymore. You look like hell, sir, Sergeant Rodriguez said, appearing beside him with his own coffee. The NCO's eyes were bloodshot from an all-night work session, but his energy seemed undiminished. Appreciate the assessment, Sergeant, Harrington replied dryly. Progress report? Rodriguez gestured toward the Vanguard. We've restored primary power systems and basic mobility functions. The hydraulics for the turret rotation mechanism need complete replacement. The seals deteriorated in storage. We're cannibalizing parts from the Thunderbolt to save time. Sacrificing one prototype to save the other, Harrington noted. Necessary, but ensure you document everything you remove. We might need to rebuild it later. Already logging every component, sir. Rodriguez hesitated before adding, the targeting radar is more problematic. The original system was designed for threats moving at Mach 2 or lower. These new drones exceed Mach 5. The physics are completely different. Harrington had anticipated this challenge. What's Dr. Reynolds' assessment? She says we need to completely redesign the tracking algorithms and possibly modify the radar hardware. She requested additional computing resources, but Wilson hasn't delivered, Harrington finished. Show me what we're working with. Rodriguez led him down to the workshop floor, navigating through the organized chaos of technicians, engineers, and equipment. The Vanguard sat partially disassembled in the center, its turret removed to allow access to the internal systems. Without its distinctive profile, it looked almost vulnerable, a far cry from the imposing weapon it needed to become. The twin 35mm system is our primary advantage, Rodriguez explained as they circled the machine. Standard proximity fused ammunition creates a lethal zone approximately 20 meters in diameter. If we can put enough rounds in the right place at the right time, we can create a defensive sphere around the vehicle. And if we can't, Harrington asked, though he already knew the answer. Then we're just making expensive noise while the drones punch through, Rodriguez admitted. It all comes down to the targeting system. They moved to an adjacent workshop where the twin 35mm cannon assembly lay partially disassembled. The massive guns looked like something from a naval destroyer rather than a land vehicle, a testament to the firepower the system would need to defeat hypersonic threats. We're upgrading the feed mechanisms to increase the rate of fire, Rodriguez continued. The original spec called for 550 rounds per minute per barrel. We think we can push that to 700 without compromising reliability. Harrington studied the weapons with a veteran's eye, noting the modifications and reinforcements. What about ammunition capacity? Higher rate of fire means burning through the magazine faster. We're redesigning the storage compartments to increase capacity from 500 to 800 rounds total. It reduces crew space, but with the automated loading system, we can manage with a 3-man crew instead of 4. Not ideal, but acceptable for the prototype, Harrington agreed. I want simulations of various engagement scenarios. How many incoming threats can we realistically engage simultaneously? Dr. Reynolds is working on those models now, but preliminary estimates suggest between 4 and 6 targets, depending on approach vectors and velocity. Not enough. Not nearly enough if the intelligence assessments were accurate about the Cauldron system's 40 drone capacity. Harrington made a mental note to prioritize this issue. Let's see the command center bus, he said, moving toward the turret assembly that sat on a testing platform nearby. The interior of the turret resembled a hybrid between a tank commander's station and an aircraft cockpit. Multiple displays surrounded the commander's position, offering tactical awareness far beyond a conventional tank. The fire control systems were almost entirely digital, a significant departure from the analog backup systems Harrington had trained on throughout his career. This is where we've made the most significant upgrades, Rodriguez explained, sliding into the gunner's seat to demonstrate. The original design required the gunner to manually designate targets for the AI tracking system. We're implementing a fully autonomous target recognition system using machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of threat profiles. Removing the human from the loop entirely, Harrington questioned, his expression revealing his discomfort with the concept. Rodriguez caught his concern. Not completely, sir. The commander still has override capability and final fire authorization. But the detection to engagement timeline for these threats is less than 2 seconds. Human reaction time simply isn't fast enough. Harrington nodded reluctantly. The old tanker in him distrusted systems that removed human judgment from the battlefield, but the tactical realist understood the necessity. Against hypersonic threats, even the most experienced gunner would be too slow. I want triple redundancy on the manual override, he insisted. If the automation fails, the crew needs to take control immediately, not fumble with recovery procedures. We'll make it happen, Rodriguez assured him. As they continued this inspection, a commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. Colonel Wilson had returned, accompanied by a team of unfamiliar civilians in business attire. Contractors, Rodriguez muttered with undisguised disdain. Black Sphere Technologies, the same company that's been lobbying against Project Phoenix for years. Harrington watched as Wilson escorted the visitors toward the administrative section, noticeably away from the prototype work areas. Why would he bring them here now? That's a very good question, sir. Before they could speculate further, Dr. Reynolds emerged from the software lab, her expression a mix of exhaustion and frustration. She spotted Harrington and made her way toward him. Colonel, we need to talk, she said without preamble. Privately. They found an empty office nearby, closing the door against the constant noise of the workshop. Reynolds immediately accessed a secure terminal, terminal, pulling up technical specifications for the targeting system. We have a fundamental problem, she began, her voice clipped with tension. The original targeting algorithms were designed using assumptions about threat profiles that are completely invalidated by the Cauldron system. We essentially need to start from scratch, and we don't have enough processing power on site to run the necessary simulations. Wilson promised additional computing resources, Harrington reminded her. Wilson has been promising a lot of things, she replied, her skepticism evident. Meanwhile, I just learned he's brought in Black Sphere contractors for a project review. The same people who've been trying to kill Phoenix for years. Harrington considered this information carefully. Could be legitimate oversight. The Pentagon would want independent assessment before reactivating a mothballed project. Or it could be corporate espionage with a government badge, Reynolds countered. Black Sphere has been developing their own counter-drone system, the Aegis network. It's a distributed ground-based laser system that's failed spectacularly in 3 consecutive field tests. But it's cheaper than Phoenix and doesn't require retrofitting existing armor units. The political and corporate dimensions of military procurement were familiar territory to Harrington after 40 years of service. He'd seen promising projects killed and inferior alternatives pushed through based on factors that had nothing to do with battlefield effectiveness. We focus on what we can control, he decided. If we can't get more computing power officially, we find alternatives. Reynolds smiled thinly. I was hoping you'd say that. I have a contact at Los Alamos who owes me a favor. They have quantum computing capacity that could run our simulations in hours instead of weeks. Off the books, of course. Harrington raised an eyebrow. That's skirting several regulations, Doctor. So is bringing corporate contractors into a classified military facility without proper vetting, she replied. Sometimes you have to bend rules to save lives. He couldn't argue with her logic. Do it, but maintain deniability for your team. If there's fallout, it lands on me. Understood. There's something else you should know. She lowered her voice further. I've been analyzing the penetrator fragments from the attack. The metallurgical composition includes trace elements that serve as a material signature. I've seen this signature before in classified Phoenix research 3 years ago. The implications were disturbing. You're suggesting direct technology transfer, not just similar development paths? I'm stating that the penetrators used against our tanks contain an alloy formulation developed specifically for Project Phoenix and never published outside of our secure database. The probability of independent development is astronomically low. Harrington processed this revelation, the pieces of a disturbing puzzle beginning to align. We have a security breach, possibly ongoing. That would be my assessment, Reynolds confirmed. And with Black Sphere personnel now on site, the threat went unspoken but was clearly understood. If Phoenix technology had already been compromised once, bringing contractors from a competing defense firm into the facility represented an unacceptable risk. Limit information sharing, Harrington instructed. Essential personnel only. Create a compartmentalized development structure. Each team only knows their piece of the puzzle. Already implemented, Reynolds assured him. Rodriguez and I established information firewalls last night. The core targeting algorithms are isolated on standalone systems. Harrington nodded approval. Reynolds and Rodriguez had anticipated security concerns and taken appropriate measures without waiting for orders. It reinforced his growing confidence in the core team. What's your honest assessment of our timeline, he asked. Can we make 20 days? Reynolds didn't sugarcoat her response. If we get the computing resources I've requested, and if Rodriguez can solve the feed reliability issues with the 35mm system, and if Wilson doesn't actively interfere, maybe. It's going to require round-the-clock work and some significant technical breakthroughs. Then that's what we'll do, Harrington stated simply. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rodriguez entered, his expression grim. Sir, we've got a problem. The first test firing of the 35mm system is scheduled for tomorrow, but half the test ammunition has been reassigned to another project. Wilson signed off on the transfer this morning. Harrington's eyes narrowed. Find Wilson, now. Minutes later, they confronted the colonel in the facility's main conference room, where he was briefing the Black Sphere representatives. Gentlemen, excuse us, Harrington said to the contractors, his tone leaving no room for debate. Colonel Wilson and I need to discuss a resource allocation issue. Wilson's annoyance was visible, but he maintained professional composure. We'll continue shortly, he told the contractors, who filed out with obvious reluctance. Once alone, Harrington dispensed with pleasantries. You transferred half our test ammunition without consultation. That delays critical testing by at least a week. The Redstone Arsenal project had priority authorization from the Pentagon, Wilson replied smoothly. I was following direct orders. Bullshit, Rodriguez interjected, earning a sharp glance from Wilson. Sorry, sir, but that's not accurate. I checked the authorization. Redstone isn't scheduled to begin testing for another 3 weeks. The ammunition would sit in storage while our project stalls. Wilson's jaw tightened. Watch your tone, Master Sergeant. You're addressing a superior officer. And you're jeopardizing American lives, Harrington countered. Every day of delay puts more soldiers at risk, including my son. Transfer the ammunition back or I'll contact General Martinez directly. The implied threat hung in the air. Martinez outranked Wilson and had been instrumental in bringing Harrington onto the project. Both men knew a direct appeal would likely succeed. That won't be necessary, Wilson finally conceded. I'll restore the full ammunition allocation. But understand this, Colonel Harrington, your personal connection to this situation is noted. Don't let it cloud your judgment about project priorities. My judgment is perfectly clear, Harrington replied, and my priorities are saving American lives. Is that understood? Wilson offered a tight nod before departing, leaving Harrington alone with Reynolds and Rodriguez. That man is either incompetent or deliberately obstructing us, Reynolds said once Wilson was out of earshot. Either way, he's dangerous to the project. Focus on your work, Doctor, Harrington advised. I'll handle Wilson. As Reynolds and Rodriguez returned to their respective tasks, Harrington remained in the conference room, reviewing the project schedule on a secure tablet. The confrontation with Wilson had confirmed his suspicions the other officer was not fully committed to Project Phoenix's success. Whether that stemmed from corporate influence, competing priorities, or something more sinister remained to be determined. The countdown clock in his mind continued its relentless march. 59 days until Michael deployed. 19 days until their deadline. Each hour that passed was one they couldn't recover. Harrington felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a warning sign from his damaged heart. He reached for his medication, swallowing a pill dry, and forced himself to take several deep breaths. The pressure gradually subsided, but left him with a sobering reminder of his own vulnerability. If his health failed now, the project might falter. And if the project failed, Michael and countless other American soldiers would face the cauldron system unprotected. Failure was not an option. For the project, for his son, for himself. He returned to the workshop floor, where preparation for tomorrow's critical test firing continued despite the setbacks. The Vanguard prototype was taking shape once more, transforming from a mothballed relic into America's best hope against a deadly new threat. But as Harrington watched the technicians work, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against more than time. Someone, perhaps within their own ranks, seemed determined to ensure they didn't succeed. Chapter 5. Under Pressure. The night before the first live fire test, Harrington found himself alone in the facility's small mess hall, reviewing test procedures over a barely touched meal. The rest of the team had been ordered to get some rest, though he suspected Reynolds was still working in the software lab despite his directive. The woman was as stubborn as she was brilliant, a quality he respected even when it complicated his authority. The sound of approaching footsteps broke his concentration. Rodriguez appeared, carrying a mug of coffee and looking as tired as Harrington felt. "Thought I'd find you here, sir," the sergeant said, taking a seat across from him. "You should follow your own orders about rest." "I'll sleep when the test is complete," Harrington replied, pushing aside the cold food. "Any updates on the targeting systems?" Rodriguez nodded. Dr. Reynolds received the first batch of simulation results from her unofficial resource. The news is mixed. The system can theoretically track hypersonic targets, but the engagement window is incredibly narrow, less than 1.5 seconds from detection to effective countermeasure deployment. Can the gun cycle fast enough to establish an effective defensive sphere in that time frame? That's what tomorrow's test will determine. On paper, it's right at the edge of possible. Rodriguez hesitated before adding, "Sir, there's something else you should know. I was reviewing the maintenance logs from when Phoenix was mothballed. There are discrepancies." Harrington's attention sharpened. What kind of discrepancies? Critical components that were supposedly preserved in climate-controlled storage show degradation consistent with exposure to elements. Microelectronics with corrosion that shouldn't be possible under proper storage protocols. It's as if someone deliberately compromised key systems after the project was officially suspended. The revelation aligned with Reynolds' concerns about technology transfer to adversaries. If someone had been systematically sabotaging the prototypes while simultaneously extracting technical data, it would explain both the advanced state of the cauldron system and the extensive restoration work now required. "Have you shared this with anyone else?" Harrington asked. "Just Dr. Reynolds. We've implemented additional security measures around the remaining critical components." "Good. Keep this between the three of us for now." Harrington considered their options carefully. "We need to identify the source of the sabotage, but we can't allow it to delay the project. Double-check everything before tomorrow's test. Trust nothing that hasn't been personally verified." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Will do, sir. There's one more thing. It's about Colonel Wilson. He's scheduled a full project review for the day after tomorrow, with the Black Sphere representatives in attendance. They're requesting complete access to all technical documentation and test results." The timing was suspicious, immediately following their first major test. "Stall them," Harrington decided. "Bureaucratic delays, missing paperwork, classification reviews, anything to buy time. I want our prototype operational before anyone outside the core team sees complete technical data." "Understood, sir. We can probably delay for 3 or 4 days at most before higher authority intervenes." Every day counted in their race against the deployment clock. If they could demonstrate a functioning system before external interference, they'd be in a stronger position to maintain control of the project. As Rodriguez departed to implement the new security measures, Harrington felt the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. The technical challenges alone would have been daunting, but the addition of potential sabotage and corporate espionage created a multi-layered threat environment more complex than many battlefield situations he'd faced. Sleep eluded him that night, his mind cycling through contingencies and worst-case scenarios. When dawn broke over the test range, Harrington was already present, reviewing final preparations with Reynolds and Rodriguez. The Vanguard prototype had been transported to a remote section of White Sands, well away from the main facility and potential observation. The test itself was deceptively simple. The Vanguard would attempt to track and intercept a series of target drones, simulating the profile of the Cauldron penetrators. The targets would approach from multiple vectors at varying speeds, culminating in a final approach at Mach 3, the highest velocity they could safely test in the current configuration. "Remember, this is a targeting and tracking test only," Reynolds reminded the assembled team. "We're validating the sensor suite and response algorithms, not the full defensive capability." Harrington stood on an observation platform 100 meters from the test vehicle, watching as the final preparations were completed. The Vanguard looked formidable once more. Its distinctive low-profile turret housing the twin 35mm cannons that represented America's best defense against the hypersonic threat. "Commencing test sequence in 5 minutes," the range controller announced over the comm system. "All personnel clear to safe positions." As the countdown proceeded, Harrington felt the familiar mix of tension and focus that preceded combat operations. This wasn't technically battle, but the stakes felt just as high. The test results would either validate their approach or send them back to the drawing board, with precious days lost. First target launching in 3, 2, 1, mark. A small drone accelerated down the test range, its profile deliberately matching the radar cross-section of the Cauldron penetrators. The Vanguard's radar array pivoted smoothly, tracking the target as it approached at a relatively modest Mach 0.8. "Target acquired," Reynolds reported from the control station. "Tracking solution stable. Simulated engagement successful." Harrington nodded, but reserved judgment. The easy targets meant nothing. It was the hypersonic approaches that would determine success or failure. The test proceeded through increasingly challenging scenarios. Multiple targets, evasive maneuvers, varied approach angles. The Vanguard systems performed admirably through the early stages, establishing tracking solutions and simulating successful engagements. Then came the moment of truth. "Final target sequence initiating," the range controller announced. "Hypersonic approach profile, multiple simultaneous targets." 3 drones launched simultaneously from different positions, their engines flaring as they accelerated rapidly toward the Vanguard. These were the most advanced test drones available, capable of sustained Mach 3+ flight for short durations. Still far slower than the actual Cauldron penetrators, but the closest approximation possible under test conditions. The Vanguard's tracking radar swiveled rapidly, attempting to establish targeting solutions on the approaching threats. Reynolds' voice remained professional but tense as she narrated the system's response. "Targets acquired, tracking, targeting solution established on threats 1 and 3, searching for threat 2. Harrington watched intently as the system struggled with the complex scenario. 2 of 3 targets tracked successfully was promising but insufficient. In a real attack, even a single missed penetrator would result in a destroyed tank and dead crew. "Threat 2 tracking failed," Reynolds reported as the drones roared past the Vanguard. "Simulated penetration of defensive envelope. test vehicle destroyed in simulation. A collective tension descended over the observation area. The test had revealed exactly what they'd feared: the system could track some hypersonic targets, but not with the reliability needed for actual combat conditions. "I want full diagnostic data," Harrington ordered, already moving toward the test vehicle. "Every sensor reading, every processor cycle. We need to understand exactly where the tracking failed." Rodriguez met him halfway to the Vanguard, his expression grave. "Sir, we have a serious problem. The targeting radar experienced power fluctuations during the final approach sequence. That's why it lost threat too." "Equipment failure?" "That's what it looks like initially, but I inspected those power systems myself yesterday. They were functioning perfectly." The implication was clear: sabotage. Either the systems had been deliberately compromised, or someone had interfered with the test in real time. Reynolds joined them, her tablet displaying diagnostic data. The power fluctuation originated in junction box 7, which wasn't part of the scheduled inspection yesterday. It's as if someone knew exactly where to strike to compromise the test while maintaining plausible deniability. Harrington surveyed the test range, noting the various personnel still present. Who among them might be working to ensure Project Phoenix failed? Wilson was the obvious suspect given his connections to Black Sphere, but he hadn't been present during the final preparations. Someone else on the technical team must be involved. "We keep this information compartmentalized," he decided. "Official report states equipment failure due to storage degradation. Unofficially, we implement security protocols for compromised environment. No critical system goes uninspected. No test proceeds without direct supervision from one of us three." Reynolds nodded agreement. "I can modify the tracking algorithms to compensate for potential power fluctuations. It won't be elegant, but it might create enough redundancy to maintain targeting through intentional disruptions." "Do it," Harrington approved. "Rodriguez, I want the entire power distribution system replaced, not just repaired. Completely new components with continuous monitoring." "That will delay our next test by at least 48 hours, Rodriguez warned. "Better a short delay now than catastrophic failure later," Harrington replied. "We adapt and overcome. That's what soldiers do." As they worked to secure the prototype for transport back to the main facility, a convoy of vehicles approached from the direction of the headquarters. Wilson had arrived with his Black Sphere associates, timing his appearance to coincide with the conclusion of testing. "Convenient timing," Reynolds muttered as Wilson's SUV parked nearby. "Too convenient," Harrington agreed. "Remember, equipment failure due to storage degradation. Nothing more." Wilson approached with 2 Black Sphere executives in tow, his expression carefully neutral as he surveyed the test setup. "Colonel Harrington, I understand there were issues with the test. The preliminary report mentioned targeting failures." "Storage degradation affected some power systems," Harrington replied, revealing nothing beyond the agreed cover story. "We're implementing replacements for the affected components." "Perhaps Black Sphere's expertise could be valuable in addressing these issues," one of the executives suggested smoothly. "Our Aegis system uses distributed power architecture specifically designed to prevent single-point failures." "We appreciate the offer," Harrington responded diplomatically, "but we have the necessary expertise on our team. Sergeant Rodriguez is implementing military-grade replacements that meet our specific requirements." Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The Pentagon expects full cooperation with our corporate partners, Colonel. Their insight could save valuable development time. My primary concern is developing a system that keeps American soldiers alive, not integration with corporate technology stacks," Harrington countered. "Once we've established basic functionality, we'll welcome input on potential enhancements." The subtle power struggle was clear to everyone present. Wilson was attempting to insert Black Sphere deeper into the project, while Harrington maintained defensive boundaries around the core technology. Both men understood that whoever controlled the development process would ultimately determine whether Phoenix succeeded or failed. "The review tomorrow will proceed as scheduled," Wilson stated, making it clear this wasn't a request. "We expect comprehensive test data and system specifications to be available for evaluation." "Of course," Harrington agreed, having no intention of complying fully. "All appropriate documentation will be provided within security guidelines." As Wilson and his corporate associates departed, Reynolds approached Harrington with concern evident in her expression. "They're making their move earlier than expected," she observed. "If they gain access to complete technical specifications now when we're still vulnerable—" "They won't," Harrington assured her. "There are 40 years of Pentagon bureaucracy at my disposal. We'll drown them in paperwork and partial documentation while keeping the core innovations secure. Rodriguez joined them, watching Wilson's convoy depart. Sir, about the power failure. I've completed initial diagnostics. The failure pattern is consistent with remote electronic interference, not physical sabotage. Someone used a directed energy device to disrupt the power regulation systems during the critical test phase. The revelation was disturbing, but informative. Physical access wasn't required, which expanded the pool of potential saboteurs but also suggested more sophisticated opposition than they'd initially suspected. Implement electromagnetic shielding around all critical systems, Harrington ordered. If they're using directed energy to disrupt our tests, we counter with appropriate defenses. As they returned to the main facility, Harrington felt the familiar tightness in his chest returning. The stress, lack of sleep, and constant tension were taking their toll. He discreetly took another pill, hoping the episode would pass without escalating. Reynolds noticed his discomfort despite his attempts to conceal it. Colonel, when was the last time you slept properly? I'll rest when we have a functioning prototype, he deflected. You'll rest now, she insisted, her tone shifting from subordinate to medical authority. 4 hours minimum. Rodriguez and I can handle the immediate recovery operations. If you collapse from exhaustion or cardiac issues, this entire project could fail. Her logic was irrefutable, though Harrington resisted on principle. 2 hours, he countered. Then wake me for the preliminary analysis of the test data. 4 hours, she repeated firmly. Doctor's orders. The analysis will be waiting for you, and you'll be able to evaluate it with a clear mind. Recognizing defeat, Harrington reluctantly agreed. In the small quarters assigned to him, he lay down fully clothed, intending only to rest briefly despite his concession to Reynolds. But 40 years of military service had taught his body to seize sleep whenever available. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed him completely. He dreamed of burning tanks in the desert, of Michael trapped inside as hypersonic penetrators punched through armor plating, of time running out as he struggled against unseen enemies determined to ensure his failure. When he woke exactly 4 hours later, the mental images lingered, reinforcing his determination to overcome both the technical challenges and the human opposition facing Project Phoenix. Reynolds had left a comprehensive test analysis on his secured tablet. The data confirmed their initial assessment the Vanguard could track most hypersonic targets, but reliability decreased dramatically with multiple simultaneous threats. The power disruption had exposed a critical vulnerability, but even without sabotage, the system needed significant enhancements to counter the Cauldron threat effectively. As Harrington reviewed the data, Rodriguez arrived with news from the workshop. Sir, we've completed the power system replacement and added electromagnetic shielding to all critical components. Dr. Reynolds has implemented software redundancies that should maintain tracking capability even with partial system failures. Good work, Sergeant. When can we schedule the next test? 48 hours at the earliest. We need to recalibrate the targeting sensors after the power system replacement. Harrington nodded, making mental calculations. Even with delays, they were still within their 20-day timeline, though with increasingly thin margins for error. In the situation with Wilson and Black Sphere, Rodriguez's expression darkened. They're pushing hard for the full technical review tomorrow. I've implemented the delaying tactics as you suggested, but Wilson has escalated to Pentagon channels. We'll need to provide something substantive or risk direct intervention. Prepare a limited technical package, Harrington decided, enough to demonstrate progress without revealing our core innovations or vulnerabilities. Focus on hardware specifications rather than targeting algorithms or fire control systems. Understood. There's one more thing, sir. Dr. Reynolds asked me to give you this. Rodriguez handed over a secure data drive, unmarked except for a handwritten label reading Hellhound Analysis. She's been reviewing the classified files on the original Hellhound incident, Rodriguez explained. Said you should see this immediately in private. Harrington's expression remained neutral, but internally the mention of Hellhound stirred dark memories. The failed prototype, the dead crew members, the mission that had haunted him for 30 years. Thank you, Sergeant. Continue with preparations for the next test. I'll review this and join you shortly. Alone once more, Harrington inserted the drive into his secured tablet. Reynolds had compiled an extensive analysis of the original Hellhound incident, cross-referencing the classified files with her own expertise in weapons system design. Her conclusions were highlighted in stark terms. The catastrophic failure of the Hellhound prototype was not the result of design flaws or operator error as officially reported. Forensic analysis of the system logs indicates deliberate code manipulation introduced precisely 17 minutes before the engagement sequence. The targeting system was intentionally programmed to lock onto friendly aircraft signatures while appearing to malfunction randomly. This was sabotage, not failure. The revelation hit Harrington with physical force. For 30 years, he had carried the weight of those deaths, believing the experimental system had failed due to rushed development in battlefield pressures. To learn now that someone had deliberately caused the malfunction that killed his men was both enraging and illuminating. Reynolds had included a technical analysis of the sabotage methodology, noting disturbing similarities to the power disruption during the recent test. The same fingerprints 3 decades apart. Not identical techniques, but consistent methodologies suggesting either the same actor or institutional knowledge passed down. The implications were staggering. If Hellhound had been sabotaged and similar methods were being employed against Phoenix, it suggested a long-term effort to prevent the American military from developing effective mobile air defense systems. But who would benefit from such vulnerability and over such an extended time frame? Harrington secured the data drive and made his way to Reynolds' lab, finding her alone among complex simulation models and technical readouts. "You saw my analysis?" she asked without preamble. "I did. Are you certain about the Hellhound sabotage? There's no possibility of misinterpreting the data?" "I've run the analysis 3 different ways," she confirmed. The code manipulation was deliberate and sophisticated, designed to appear as system instability under combat stress. Someone wanted Hellhound to fail spectacularly, discrediting the entire concept for decades. And they succeeded, Harrington acknowledged grimly. After Hellhound, the Army abandoned vehicle-based air defense until Phoenix, 30 years later. Now the same forces appear to be working against us. "The question is why," Reynolds said, lowering her voice further despite the secure location. "Who benefits from American tanks remaining vulnerable to air attack across decades of technological development?" "Foreign adversaries are the obvious answer," Harrington reasoned, but the access required for both Hellhound and Phoenix suggests domestic involvement. Corporate interest, perhaps. Reynolds nodded. Blacksphere wasn't around during Hellhound, but several of their current executives were with other defense contractors that opposed similar programs. The financial incentives or substantial competition for multi-billion-dollar defense contracts creates powerful motivations. Or ideological penetration, Harrington added. Long-term assets placed within defense infrastructure. The possibilities were deeply troubling, suggesting threats not just to their project, but potentially to national security on a broader scale. Yet without concrete evidence identifying specific actors, accusations would be dismissed as paranoia or desperation. "We proceed as planned," Harrington decided, but with enhanced security and awareness. Everything gets triple-checked. All critical systems remain under direct observation by trusted personnel only. And Wilson, Blacksphere? "We give them enough to satisfy Pentagon oversight requirements without compromising core functionality. If they are involved in sabotage, let them believe they're succeeding while we build in countermeasures they don't anticipate." Reynolds seemed satisfied with this approach. "I've made progress on the targeting algorithms. Using the quantum computing resources, we've developed a predictive tracking system that anticipates penetrator trajectories based on launch characteristics. Early simulations show 83% successful interception rate against hypersonic targets even with partial sensor data. The improvement was significant, potentially game-changing if it translated from simulation to actual performance. When can we integrate these algorithms into the Vanguard system? I've already begun implementation, Reynolds admitted. We should be ready to test the enhanced targeting system in conjunction with the power system upgrades. Harrington felt the first genuine optimism since the project began. Despite sabotage attempts and corporate interference, they were making tangible progress toward a system that could potentially protect American tanks, including his sons, from the Cauldron threat. The countdown clock showed 17 days remaining until their deadline. Tight, but achievable if they maintained their current momentum. As Harrington left Reynolds to her work, he found himself reflexively checking his surroundings, newly aware that enemies might be closer than he'd initially believed. The technical challenges of Project Phoenix were daunting enough. The human opposition now revealed made success seem almost impossible. But William Harrington had built a career on achieving the impossible when American lives depended on it. He would not fail now with his son's life directly at stake. The unseen enemies working against Phoenix had made a critical error in their calculations. They had made the mission personal for a man who had never accepted defeat, even when facing overwhelming odds. And in doing so, they had transformed a challenging project into a father's unwavering commitment to protect his child no matter the cost. Chapter 6, Trial by Fire. The morning of the second live fire test dawned clear and cold. The New Mexico desert still in the grip of pre-dawn chill as the test team made final preparations. Harrington stood beside the Vanguard prototype, now restored to full operational status with enhanced power systems and electromagnetic shielding, protecting its critical components. All systems are green, Rodriguez reported, emerging from his final inspection. Power distribution is stable, targeting sensors are online, and the ammunition feed systems have been tested to 720 rounds per minute sustained fire. What about the enhanced targeting algorithms? Harrington asked, watching as technicians secured the last access panels. Dr. Reynolds uploaded the final version an hour ago. Full integration with the fire control systems and triple redundant targeting processors. We've got something special for this test, sir. The sergeant's expression held suppressed excitement, suggesting developments Harrington wasn't fully briefed on. Define special, Sergeant. We've integrated an experimental active defense system, Rodriguez explained. Dr. Reynolds calls it Firebreak. It creates a microsecond electromagnetic pulse synchronized with our targeting solution, designed to disrupt the guidance systems of incoming penetrators, even if we can't physically intercept them. That wasn't in the original specifications, Harrington noted, surprised by the significant addition. No, sir, it wasn't. Reynolds developed it based on her analysis of the Cauldron penetrator fragments. She identified a potential vulnerability in their guidance systems that might be exploitable. Innovation beyond the original mission parameters, driven by necessity and insight. Exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that had kept American forces effective against evolving threats for generations. Has it been simulated? Extensively, the quantum computing resources Dr. Reynolds accessed ran over 10,000 engagement scenarios. Firebreak improved the defensive effectiveness by nearly 40% when combined with conventional interception. Harrington nodded approval. Good initiative. Where's Dr. Reynolds now? Final calibration in the control center. She wanted to personally verify the Firebreak timing sequences. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Reynolds appeared, looking exhausted but determined. She had clearly worked through the night, but her focus remained sharp. Colonel, we're ready for the test sequence, she reported. This will be significantly more challenging than the previous test. We've programmed the target drones to utilize evasive maneuvers modeled on the Cauldron attack patterns observed in the Middle East. Any sign of Wilson or the Black Sphere representatives? Harrington asked, scanning the perimeter of the test range. They're attending a budget review at headquarters, Reynolds replied with a slight smile. Apparently some discrepancies in the project financial documentation required immediate attention. Could take hours to resolve. Harrington recognized Rodriguez's handiwork in the convenient timing. Good, that gives us a clean test environment without interference. Let's proceed. The three made their way to the control center, a hardened bunker positioned to observe the test range while providing protection from any potential ammunition malfunctions. Inside, a team of technicians monitored an array of sensor displays and control systems. Test sequence is programmed for 3 phases, Reynolds explained as they took their positions. Phase 1 is basic tracking and targeting against conventional speed targets, similar to the previous test. Phase 2 introduces multiple simultaneous threats with evasive capabilities. Phase 3 is the critical test hypersonic penetrators with randomized approach vectors. Unlike the previous test, this one would include actual live fire from the twin 35mm cannons, using specialized test ammunition designed to simulate the proximity-fused rounds that would be deployed in combat without the full explosive payload. Commence Phase 1, Harrington ordered once all safety protocols were confirmed. The test began with the launch of conventional speed target drones. The Vanguard's targeting systems acquired them immediately, the turret rotating smoothly to track their approach. When the lead drone crossed into the designated engagement zone, the 35mm cannons roared to life, sending precisely aimed bursts of ammunition into the flight path. The results were impressive. All 3 conventional targets were successfully engaged, the proximity rounds detonating at the optimal distance to ensure destruction of the drones in a real combat scenario. Phase 1 complete, all targets neutralized, the range controller confirmed. Proceeding to Phase 2. The second phase introduced greater complexity. Multiple targets approaching simultaneously from different vectors, utilizing programmed evasive maneuvers to complicate targeting solutions. The Vanguard's enhanced systems performed admirably, tracking and engaging each threat in sequence based on time-to-impact prioritization. 5 of 6 targets neutralized, the controller reported as the last drone cleared the test area. Target 4 evaded successful engagement by 2.7 meters. Better than the previous test, but still not perfect. In combat, a single penetrator reaching its target would mean death for the tank crew. Adaptive targeting adjusting based on evasion profile data, Reynolds noted, watching the system learn from the near miss. The algorithms are self-correcting in real time. Proceeding to Phase 3, the controller announced. Hypersonic targets launching in 3, 2, 1. 3 specialized test drones accelerated rapidly along the range, quickly reaching Mach 3.2, their maximum sustainable velocity. Unlike conventional drones, these were essentially guided missiles, designed to simulate the profile and characteristics of the Cauldron penetrators as closely as possible without actual destructive capability. The Vanguard's radar array pivoted sharply, tracking the rapidly approaching threats. The turret followed with mechanical precision, the twin 35mm cannons elevating to the calculated intercept position. When the threats crossed into the engagement envelope, the weapons erupted with a thunderous sustained burst, creating a dense field of proximity rounds along the projected flight paths. Simultaneously, the firebrake system activated, generating a focused electromagnetic pulse timed precisely to the penetrator's passage through the defensive envelope. The combination of physical and electronic countermeasures created a layered defense unlike anything previously deployed. Target 1 neutralized, the controller reported in real time. Target 2 neutralized. Target 3 neutralized. All 3 hypersonic threats successfully engaged. A cheer erupted from the technical team. For the first time, the Vanguard had demonstrated the capability to defeat multiple hypersonic threats simultaneously, a critical milestone in countering the Cauldron system. Harrington allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. The test results exceeded expectations, validating both the enhanced targeting algorithms and the innovative firebrake system. If these capabilities translated to consistent combat performance, American tanks would have a fighting chance against the new threat. Full diagnostic analysis, he ordered, maintaining professional focus despite the successful test. I want verification that all systems performed within operational parameters, with particular attention to power stability and ammunition feed reliability. Reynolds was already reviewing the preliminary data. Everything looks nominal, Colonel. Power systems maintained 100% stability throughout the engagement sequence. Targeting acquisition matched in simulation predictions within 0.3% variance. Firebrake energy emissions were precisely synchronized with penetrator transit through the defensive envelope. What about ammunition consumption? Harrington asked, considering the logistics of sustained operations. 172 rounds expended to neutralize all 3 hypersonic threats, Rodriguez reported, well within our capacity of 800 rounds. In a combat deployment, we could engage approximately 14 hypersonic attacks before requiring rearmament. The figures were promising, especially considering the Cauldron system's estimated 40 drone capacity. A single Vanguard couldn't counter a full salvo, but networked vehicles supporting each other could potentially establish an effective defensive perimeter around armored formations. As the team continued their analysis, a security alert sounded from the perimeter monitoring system. Vehicles were approaching from the direction of the headquarters, multiple SUVs moving at high speed. Wilson, Reynolds surmised, checking the security feed, and he's brought friends, looks like the Black Sphere executives and military police. Harrington's expression hardened. Something had changed in the power dynamics surrounding the project. Wilson wouldn't bring MPs unless he felt confident in his authority or was implementing orders from higher up the chain of command. Secure all test data, he instructed rapidly. Copy the results to encrypted storage and restrict access to authorized personnel only. Rodriguez, begin recovery of the Vanguard prototype immediately. Sir, standard protocol requires leaving the test vehicle in position for post-test inspection, one of the technicians objected. Override protocol, national security concerns, move the prototype to the secure maintenance bay and initiate lockdown procedures. Reynolds and Rodriguez exchanged concerned glances, but moved immediately to implement his instructions. Years of military service had taught them to recognize when a commander perceived imminent threat, even if the nature of that threat wasn't immediately apparent to others. The vehicles arrived at the test range perimeter as the Vanguard was already being loaded onto its transport trailer. Wilson emerged from the lead SUV, accompanied by Black Sphere executives and two military police officers. His expression combined anger with smug satisfaction. "Colonel Harrington," he called as he approached the control center, "I understand you conducted an unauthorized weapons test without required oversight or safety observers present." "The test was fully authorized under defy command authority," Harrington replied calmly. "All required safety protocols were implemented and documented. Yet you failed to notify Pentagon oversight as required by project parameters," Wilson countered. "And you deliberately scheduled the test to exclude Black Sphere representatives who are contractually entitled to observe all field testing." The confrontation was clearly planned, with Wilson laying groundwork for some form of administrative action. Harrington maintained professional composure while assessing the real threat behind the procedural complaints. "Administrative oversights can be addressed through proper channels, Colonel Wilson. I assume that's not why you brought military police to a classified test facility." Wilson's smile held no warmth. "Actually, Colonel, they're here because unauthorized access to classified computing resources was traced to this facility. Specifically, quantum computing assets at Los Alamos National Laboratory were accessed using credentials associated with Project Phoenix." Reynolds stiffened slightly at this revelation, though her expression remained neutral. The unofficial resources she had leveraged to develop the enhanced targeting algorithms and firebreak system had been discovered. "Any use of external computing resources was essential to project success and falls under my authority as mission commander," Harrington stated firmly. "The Pentagon disagrees," Wilson replied, producing an official document. "Effective immediately, Project Phoenix is placed under administrative review. All testing is suspended pending security of evaluation. You and your team will provide full technical briefings to the Oversight Committee, including our Black Sphere partners, within 24 hours. The document bore the signature of a three-star General Harrington didn't recognize, likely someone from the acquisition and technology branch with no direct combat experience. Bureaucratic interference at its most dangerous, imposed at the precise moment when breakthrough success had been achieved. "And if we require additional time to properly prepare technical documentation," Harrington inquired, already calculating delay strategies, "then you'll be removed from the project entirely and replaced with personnel who understand the importance of proper procedure and corporate partnership," Wilson stated bluntly. "The military police will remain on site to ensure compliance with the review directive." The threat was clear and the timing suspicious. Just as Phoenix demonstrated its potential to counter the Cauldron threat, administrative obstacles were being deployed to delay or derail progress. Whether Wilson was actively working against American interests or simply prioritizing corporate relationships over combat effectiveness remained unclear, but the effect was the same: critical delays when every day counted. "We'll comply with all appropriate directives," Harrington assured him, choosing his words carefully. "Technical documentation will be provided according to classification guidelines and need-to-know restrictions." Wilson's expression suggested he recognized the implied resistance, but chose not to challenge it directly. "The review team will arrive tomorrow morning at 0800. I suggest you use the intervening time to ensure your documentation is complete and your prototype is prepared for comprehensive inspection." As Wilson departed with its entourage, leaving the military police to establish security positions around the facility, Harrington gathered Reynolds and Rodriguez for an immediate strategy session. "We have approximately 18 hours before the review team arrives," he stated once they were in a secured conference room. "Options? We could appeal directly to General Martinez," Reynolds suggested. "He outranks whoever signed that review order and understands the strategic importance of the project." "Time is against us," Harrington countered. "Even with Martinez's support, bureaucratic processes would delay resolution for days we don't have." Rodriguez considered their situation tactically. "What if we conduct a field demonstration instead of a technical review? Show the capabilities in action rather than exposing our technical innovations on paper." The suggestion aligned with Harrington's military instincts. Practical demonstration of effectiveness over theoretical documentation. It could work, but Wilson will resist anything that limits Black Sphere's access to our technology. "Unless we make the demonstration too impressive to ignore," Reynolds proposed. "What if we demonstrate against actual Cauldron specifications, not just our test approximations?" How? We can't replicate Mach 5 plus velocities in our test environment. Reynolds smiled slightly. We don't have to. I can program a simulation overlay on the test range sensors that accurately represents hypersonic engagement profiles. The system would be responding to actual physical targets while simultaneously processing simulated hypersonic threats. If the demonstration succeeds, it proves capability against the real threat without requiring actual Mach 5 test vehicles. The approach was innovative and potentially effective. Rather than engaging in bureaucratic warfare they were likely to lose, they would shift the battlefield to demonstration of combat effectiveness where their advantages were strongest. Make it happen, Harrington decided. Rodriguez, ensure the Vanguard is at peak operational readiness. I want redundant systems for everything critical. If they attempt technical sabotage during the inspection, I want fail-safes in place. Already on it, sir. I've implemented isolated backup systems for all critical functions, independently powered and electromagnetically shielded. Harrington nodded approval, then turned to Reynolds. Prepare 2 sets of technical documentation, one with basic functional descriptions meeting minimum disclosure requirements, the other with complete technical specifications secured for authorized military personnel only. If Wilson or Blacksphere push for greater disclosure than appropriate, we'll have documented reasons for refusal. What about the quantum computing issue? She asked. They know we accessed external resources. I'll take full responsibility, Harrington stated. The decision was mine as mission commander, made under national security exemptions given the threat to deployed forces. They can censure me if they want, but the project continues. As his team departed to implement the strategy, Harrington remained alone in the conference room, reviewing the successful test data while considering the broader implications of Wilson's intervention. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Just as Phoenix demonstrated viable countermeasures to the Cauldron threat, bureaucratic obstacles materialized to impede progress. Combined with the evidence of deliberate sabotage in both the original Hellhound project and current testing, a disturbing pattern emerged. Someone with access to American defense infrastructure was working to ensure tank vulnerabilities remained exploitable by adversaries. Whether motivated by profit, ideology, or other factors, the effect was the same: American soldiers would die if this sabotage succeeded. Soldiers, including Michael Harrington, still preparing for deployment with no knowledge of either the threat awaiting him or his father's desperate race to develop countermeasures. The countdown clock in Harrington's mind continued its relentless march. 53 days until Michael deployed, 14 days until their internal deadline, and now less than 24 hours to navigate a deliberately imposed bureaucratic minefield threatening the entire project. The pressure triggered another episode of chest pain, more intense than previous occurrences. Harrington fumbled with his medication, swallowing the pill as he fought to control his breathing. The pain gradually subsided, but left him with a sobering awareness of his own mortality and the precarious balance between success and failure. If his health failed now, Phoenix might fail with it. And if Phoenix failed, Michael and countless other American soldiers would face the Cauldron system without adequate defenses, an unacceptable outcome for both the soldier and the father. As night fell over White Sands, the facility remained illuminated and active, the combined team working tirelessly to prepare for tomorrow's critical confrontation. Not a battle with enemy forces, but perhaps something equally dangerous, a fight against those who should have been allies, but now appeared as obstacles to mission success. William Harrington had spent 40 years preparing for warfare against foreign adversaries. Now, in what might be his final mission, he found himself fighting against American bureaucracy, corporate interests, and possibly deliberate sabotage from within. A different kind of battlefield, but with stakes just as high as any he had faced before. The Pentagon conference room gleamed with polished mahogany and brass fixtures, a setting designed to impress upon visitors the weight and authority of American military power. To William Harrington, who had spent 4 decades serving that power in dusty combat zones around the world, the ornate surroundings seemed oddly disconnected from the realities of warfare. 7 men and 2 women occupied the long table, representatives from various military branches, defense agencies, congressional committees, and corporate interests. At the head sat General Thomas Martinez, the only person present Harrington truly trusted. Beside Martinez sat a stern-faced senator from the Armed Services Committee, her reputation for fiscal scrutiny preceding her. "Colonel Harrington," the senator began, You've requested this emergency hearing to advocate for immediate deployment of Project Phoenix, despite numerous procedural irregularities and budget concerns. Given that the project was officially deactivated 2 years ago, this committee requires compelling evidence to justify reallocation of significant resources. Harrington stood at parade rest, his posture military perfect, despite the pressure in his chest that had become a constant companion. The journey from White Sands to Washington had been physically taxing, but he'd refused to show weakness. Too much depended on this hearing. Senator, committee members, I appreciate the opportunity to present our findings, he began, his voice steady with the authority of combat experience. 3 weeks ago, American tanks were destroyed by a previously unknown weapon system designated Cauldron. Intelligence confirms this system will be deployed against the 4th Armored Brigade when they arrive in theater next month. Project Phoenix represents our only viable countermeasure within the available timeframe. Wilson, seated midway down the table, interjected smoothly. While the threat is concerning, Blacksphere's Aegis network offers a more cost-effective solution that leverages existing platforms without requiring specialized vehicles. The Aegis network has failed 3 consecutive field tests against supersonic targets, Harrington countered. It has no demonstrated capability against hypersonic threats. Phoenix has successfully engaged multiple hypersonic targets simultaneously in controlled testing. He activated the secure presentation system, displaying footage from their successful test. The committee watched as the Vanguard prototype tracked and neutralized hypersonic targets with precision. Impressive, the Air Force representative acknowledged, but this test was conducted without proper oversight or verification. How can we be certain these results are reproducible in actual combat conditions? The test protocols were fully documented and conformed to established standards, Harrington replied. We've prepared comprehensive performance data for review by qualified military evaluators. The emphasis on military evaluators was deliberate, a subtle reminder that corporate observers like Blacksphere might have conflicts of interest when assessing competing systems. Wilson's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Colonel Harrington's dedication is admirable, but his judgment may be compromised by personal factors. His son's unit is scheduled for deployment to the affected region, creating a significant emotional bias in his assessment. The statement was technically accurate, but deliberately misleading, attempting to frame Harrington's personal stake as a liability rather than motivation for excellence. Before Harrington could respond, Martinez spoke for the first time. I've reviewed the test data independently, the general stated, his voice carrying the quiet authority of senior command. The results are consistent with established performance metrics and suggest a viable countermeasure to the Cauldron threat. Colonel Harrington's personal connection to deployed forces doesn't invalidate the technical achievements. The committee members exchanged glances, weighing the assessment from a respected general against corporate concerns and budgetary constraints. The Navy representative leaned forward. What timeline are we considering for deployment if approved? Training requirements alone would typically require months for a new system. We've developed an accelerated training protocol, Harrington explained. 3 days of simulator training, followed by 5 days of live fire exercises. It's condensed but sufficient for basic operational capability. Full proficiency would develop through continued training in theater. Unacceptably rushed, Wilson objected. Standard acquisition protocols require minimum 3-month evaluation periods before combat deployment. American tanks are burning now, Colonel Wilson, Harrington responded, his voice hardening. When soldiers are dying, we adapt protocols to meet battlefield realities. He activated another segment of the presentation, this one showing the aftermath of the Cauldron attack. The committee members sobered at the images of destroyed Abrams tanks, their armored hulls breached with surgical precision. 43 American soldiers died in this attack, Harrington continued. Their families weren't concerned with acquisition protocols or corporate partnerships. They expected their country to provide the best possible protection for their loved ones. The senator studied him carefully. You're suggesting corners should be cut in evaluation and testing because of combat urgency. I'm stating that appropriate urgency doesn't constitute cutting corners, Harrington corrected respectfully. Every required test has been conducted. Every safety protocol has been followed. What we've eliminated is bureaucratic delay, not necessary evaluation. The defense procurement officer, a civilian with decades of experience navigating Pentagon bureaucracy, cleared his throat. Colonel, your proposed timeline ignores mandatory competitive bidding requirements. Black Sphere's Aegis system must be given equal consideration under federal acquisition regulations. With respect, Harrington replied, national security emergency provisions allow direct procurement when unique capabilities address imminent threats to deployed forces. Phoenix demonstrates capabilities no competing system has achieved against hypersonic targets. As the debate continued, Harrington maintained his composed exterior while monitoring the subtle reactions around the table. Martinez clearly supported Phoenix but was constrained by political realities. The senator seemed genuinely concerned about both soldier safety and fiscal responsibility. Wilson and the Black Sphere representative worked in tandem, raising procedural objections and alternative proposals that would effectively delay Phoenix deployment until after the 4th Armored Brigade entered the combat zone. After 90 minutes of technical discussion and bureaucratic maneuvering, the senator called for a brief recess. As the committee members filed out, Martinez approached Harrington privately. They're leaning toward a compromise, the general informed him quietly. Limited production authorization with extended evaluation requirements. It would delay deployment until after the 4th Brigade is in theater. Unacceptable, Harrington responded. That puts Michael and his entire unit at risk with no protection against Cauldron. Martinez nodded grimly. I know, but Wilson has leveraged significant political capital. Black Sphere's government relations team has been working congressional offices for weeks, positioning Aegis as the fiscally responsible option despite its technical limitations. Politics over soldiers' lives, Harrington said bitterly. It's always been this way, Bill. You know that. The difference is usually measured in acceptable casualties rather than preventable ones. Martinez hesitated before adding, there's something else you should know. Medical flagged your file after your last physical. They're questioning your fitness for continued service. The news wasn't unexpected, but the timing suggested Wilson's influence. Convenient timing. Very, Martinez agreed. Be prepared for them to use it against you when we reconvene. When the committee returned, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Wilson sat with newfound confidence, while several committee members avoided direct eye contact with Harrington, suggesting backroom agreements had been reached during the recess. The senator resumed the hearing with practiced neutrality. Colonel Harrington, this committee recognizes the urgency of addressing the Cauldron threat. However, we must balance immediate needs with established procurement protocols. The preliminary recommendation is for limited Phoenix production authorization with concurrent extended evaluation of both Phoenix and competing systems. Exactly as Martinez had predicted. A bureaucratic compromise that would satisfy budgetary concerns and corporate interests while leaving American tanks vulnerable when it mattered most. Madam Senator, committee members, Harrington began, adjusting his strategy. Before you finalize that recommendation, there's additional information you should consider. He produced a secure data drive, connecting it to the presentation system. During our investigation of the Phoenix prototype, we discovered evidence suggesting deliberate sabotage of both the current project and its predecessor, Operation Hellhound, 30 years ago. Wilson straightened in his chair, his composed demeanor slipping momentarily. This is inappropriate, Madam Senator. Colonel Harrington is introducing unsubstantiated accusations to distract from legitimate procurement concerns. The evidence is fully documented, Harrington continued calmly, including technical analysis confirming that the Hellhound malfunction, which killed 3 American soldiers, was the result of deliberate code manipulation, not system failure. The revelation sent a ripple through the committee. Martinez's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed he hadn't been aware of this development. Furthermore, Harrington continued, forensic analysis of the recent Phoenix test sabotage shows methodological similarities suggesting institutional knowledge transferred over decades. Someone has systematically worked to prevent American tanks from obtaining effective air defense capabilities. The senator's expression hardened. These are serious allegations, Colonel. Do you have evidence identifying responsible parties? We have technical evidence confirming deliberate sabotage in both cases, Harrington stated carefully. The individual actors remain unidentified, but the technical signature suggests connections to defense contractors involved in competing systems. He didn't directly accuse Black Sphere, but the implication hung in the air. Wilson's face flushed with barely controlled anger. This is outrageous, the Black Sphere representative protested. Colonel Harrington is making veiled accusations without substantiation to protect a failing project he's emotionally invested in due to his son's deployment. The technical evidence speaks for itself, Harrington responded evenly, and I've authorized an independent review by the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Their preliminary findings confirm our analysis of deliberate sabotage. This was a calculated risk. The DCIS investigation was real but preliminary, initiated through Martinez's channels rather than formal procedures. If challenged directly, the limited scope might undermine his position, but the mere existence of an investigation lent credibility to the sabotage claims. The committee chair from Armed Services leaned forward. Colonel Wilson, were you aware of these allegations prior to this hearing? Wilson's hesitation was brief but noticeable. I was aware that Colonel Harrington had concerns about equipment malfunctions, but attributed them to storage degradation and his personal stake in accelerating the project. The technical analysis definitively rules out storage degradation, Harrington countered. The power system was deliberately compromised using directed energy weapons consistent with specialized equipment not generally available outside defense research facilities. As the implications sank in, the atmosphere in the room shifted again. What had begun as a procurement debate had transformed into a potential security breach investigation with far-reaching implications. Several committee members exchanged concerned glances, recognizing the political hazards suddenly surrounding what should have been a straightforward acquisition decision. The senator called for another recess, this one longer to allow for consultation with security specialists. As the room cleared, Martinez remained behind with Harrington. "Bold move, Bill," the general commented once they were alone. "Effective, but dangerous. Wilson has powerful connections, and Black Sphere's government contracts extend far beyond this project. I'm more concerned with saving American lives than corporate sensibilities," Harrington replied. "The evidence is solid. Dr. Reynolds verified the sabotage signatures independently, and Rodriguez documented the physical tampering." Martinez studied his old friend carefully. "How's the heart holding up? You look like hell." Harrington managed a tight smile. "I've looked worse in 3 combat zones. I'll hold together long enough to see this through." "And after?" Martinez pressed. "What's the prognosis?" "Uncertain. The doctors want additional procedures, extended rest, standard recommendations for a worn-out part that can't be easily replaced." The gallows humor didn't mask the reality both men understood. Harrington's military career was ending, one way or another. The only question was whether he would complete this final mission successfully before his health or the bureaucracy forced him out. When the committee reconvened, the mood had transformed from bureaucratic procedure to serious security concerns. The senator addressed the room with newfound gravity. "In light of Colonel Harrington's evidence, this committee is referring the sabotage allegations to appropriate investigative authorities for immediate action. In the interim, Project Phoenix will receive emergency authorization for limited production to address the imminent cauldron threat. Colonel Wilson will be temporarily reassigned pending security review." Wilson's face drained of color as 2 military police officers entered the room, positioning themselves near the door, not yet approaching him directly but clearly present for a purpose. "Madam Senator," Wilson objected, "these allegations are completely unfounded. I've served honorably for 22 years. No accusations have been made against you specifically, Colonel," the senator clarified. "The reassignment is procedural given your oversight role on both projects. Full investigation will determine where responsibility lies for the confirmed sabotage incidents." It was a political masterstroke, authorizing Phoenix while initiating an investigation broad enough to avoid directly accusing Black Sphere without specific evidence. Wilson would be isolated from the project without formal charges, removing his obstructive influence while investigations proceeded. Colonel Harrington and the senator continued, "You will retain operational authority over Phoenix deployment, with General Martinez providing direct oversight. However, this committee notes serious concerns about your medical status. You will submit to comprehensive evaluation within 48 hours, with continued command contingent on medical clearance." The compromise was better than Harrington had hoped for. Phoenix would proceed, Wilson's interference would end, and though his medical issues remained a challenge, he had at least temporary authorization to continue leading the project. As the hearing concluded, Wilson was escorted out by the military police officers, not under arrest, but clearly under observation. The Black Sphere representative departed hastily, already on his phone, likely contacting corporate lawyers and government relations specialists to manage the unfolding situation. Martinez approached Harrington as the room cleared. "You've won the first battle, but the war isn't over. Black Sphere will counterattack through political channels, and the medical evaluation isn't a formality. They'll use it to remove you if possible." I just need enough time to get Phoenix deployed before the 4th Brigade enters the combat zone, Harrington replied. After that, they can ground me permanently if they want. They can ground on. Your heart can't take much more of this, Bill, Martinez warned, genuine concern evident in his voice. The doctors weren't exaggerating the risks. Some things are worth the risk, Harrington responded simply. Michael's life, the lives of every soldier in those tanks. I didn't spend 40 years in uniform to let bureaucracy and corporate greed get American soldiers killed when I could prevent it. Martinez nodded, understanding the warrior's code that had guided both their careers. Transportation is arranged back to White Sands. Reynolds and Rodriguez have continued preparations during your absence. Production authorization paperwork will be completed within 24 hours. As Harrington departed the Pentagon, his phone vibrated with a message from Reynolds. Test sabotage source identified. Security footage shows Wilson entering restricted areas during power system calibration. Proof positive. Proceeding with final Vanguard modifications per plan. The confirmation of Wilson's direct involvement validated Harrington's suspicions, but raised deeper concerns. Had Wilson been motivated by corporate interests alone? Or was there a more sinister connection to foreign adversaries? The question would need to wait for counterintelligence investigation. For now, the priority remained getting Phoenix operational before American tanks faced the Cauldron threat. On the flight back to New Mexico, Harrington reviewed the production timeline on his secure tablet. With emergency authorization, the first Vanguard systems could begin limited production within 7 days. Training would commence immediately using the prototype, with the first operational units ready for deployment in 18 days, if everything proceeded perfectly. Cutting it dangerously close to the 4th Brigade's deployment, but possible. For the first time since the project began, Harrington allowed himself cautious optimism. The political and bureaucratic obstacles had been overcome, if temporarily. Now only the technical challenges and his own failing health stood between Phoenix and successful deployment. As the plane descended toward White Sands, Harrington swallowed another heart medication, forcing back the constant pressure in his chest through sheer willpower. Just a little longer. Just long enough to complete this final mission and ensure Michael would have the protection he'd been unable to provide for his men 30 years earlier. Some debts could never be fully repaid, but perhaps they could be honored through actions that prevented history from repeating its most tragic chapters. Chapter 8. Father and Son. The secure communications room at White Sands Missile Range hummed with electronic equipment, its screens displaying encrypted video feeds from military installations around the world. Harrington sat alone at the primary console, waiting as the connection to Camp Buehring, Kuwait established. After 3 weeks of security restrictions preventing direct contact, he would finally speak with his son. The screen flickered, then resolved to show Captain Michael Harrington in desert camouflage. His features so similar to William's at the same age, it was like looking at a ghost from his past. The younger Harrington's expression remained professionally neutral, though a flicker of surprise crossed his face at seeing his father in uniform rather than retirement attire. Captain Harrington, William began formally, conscious of the recorded nature of all military communications. Colonel, Michael replied with equal formality, I was informed you requested this call regarding a new equipment deployment. I didn't realize you'd postponed your retirement. The careful distance between them was evident even through the digital connection. 5 years of minimal communication had created barriers that wouldn't easily dissolve even with shared blood and profession. One final project, William explained, directly relevant to your upcoming deployment. Your battalion will be receiving new defensive systems for your Abrams platforms next week. I'm overseeing the final development and initial training protocols. Michael's expression shifted subtly, professional interest overriding personal distance. The rumored anti-drone system? We've heard conflicting reports about a new threat in theater. The threat is confirmed, William replied, switching to the secure intelligence channel to share sanitized information about the Cauldron system and its capabilities. Your battalion was specifically targeted for this equipment upgrade because intelligence suggests you'll face these weapons when you cross the border. Michael studied the technical data with a tank commander's practiced eye, quickly grasping the implications. These penetrators would defeat our current armor without difficulty. The kinetic energy alone would be catastrophic, William confirmed. That's why Phoenix was accelerated. The Vanguard system mounts on your existing Abrams chassis, providing dedicated anti-air defense against both conventional and hypersonic threats. As William outlined the capabilities and operational parameters of the Vanguard system, he observed his son's responses. Michael was undeniably sharp, asking incisive questions about technical specifications, deployment configurations, and integration with existing battlefield systems. Pride mingled with regret in William's chest, not just for the capable officer his son had become, but for the years of distance between them. The training timeline is compressed, William acknowledged as he concluded the briefing. Your crews will need to absorb a substantial amount of new information quickly. I've assigned Master Sergeant Rodriguez as lead instructor. He's been instrumental in the system development and understands both the technology and practical combat application. Michael nodded. We'll be ready, sir. My crews are adaptive and highly motivated, especially with confirmed threats awaiting us across the border. The professional briefing complete, an awkward silence descended. Neither man seemed certain how to bridge the personal gulf between them, or whether this was the appropriate time to attempt it. Your mother would be proud, William said finally, his voice softening slightly, of the officer you've become. Michael's expression tightened momentarily at the mention of his mother. She never wanted me to follow this path. No, William agreed. She wanted something safer for you, something with more certainty. Like you did, Michael added, the old tension surfacing. You made that clear when I chose the armor branch. The memory of their last significant conversation hung between them. 5 years earlier, at Elizabeth's funeral, when Michael had announced his selection for tank command training, William had objected, perhaps too forcefully, wanting to spare his son the physical and psychological toll he'd experienced through decades of armored warfare. I wanted you to make an informed choice, William said carefully. I'd seen too many young officers with romantic notions about tank warfare, unprepared for the realities. You thought I was naive, Michael countered, that I didn't understand what I was choosing. Perhaps I underestimated you, William conceded. It's difficult for a father to see his son walk willingly into danger even when that father has spent his life doing the same thing. Another silence, less tense but still weighted with unspoken emotions. Why this project, Michael asked finally. Why postpone retirement for one last development program? William considered how much to reveal. Security protocols prevented discussing the sabotage investigation or Black Sphere's interference. Personal pride made him reluctant to admit his health concerns. But something in his son's direct gaze, so reminiscent of Elizabeth's unflinching honesty, made him choose a version of the truth. Intelligence about the Cauldron threat came across my desk the day of my retirement ceremony, he explained. When I learned your battalion was scheduled for deployment to the target zone, I couldn't walk away. Not when I had the experience to help develop a countermeasure. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. You took this on because of me. Because of you, William acknowledged, and every soldier in those tanks. I've lost men before, Michael. Good men who trusted me to bring them home. I couldn't bear the thought of you facing a threat we could have countered if someone had just tried harder or worked faster. The professional distance between them softened slightly, allowing a glimpse of the father-son relationship that existed beneath the military ranks and formality. The Vanguard system, Michael said after a moment. It's built on the Hellhound concept, isn't it? The project you never talk about. William's surprise must have shown on his face as Michael continued. I researched it after armor school, found the redacted reports, connected some dots. 3 crew members killed when an experimental air defense system malfunctioned during Desert Storm. You were the commanding officer. How much do you know? William asked quietly. Enough to understand why it haunts you, Michael replied, and why this project matters so personally. You're trying to finish what was started 30 years ago. The insight was accurate but incomplete. William hadn't shared the recently discovered evidence of sabotage with his son, the knowledge that those deaths hadn't been caused by technical failure but deliberate action. That revelation would come later, after investigations confirmed the full scope of Wilson's betrayal. The Vanguard is what Hellhound should have been, William confirmed. More advanced, more reliable, but built on the same fundamental concept. American tanks need effective air defense capabilities, especially with emerging drone threats. Michael nodded, professional understanding bridging the personal distance between them. We'll make good use of it, sir. My crews won't let you down. I know, William replied, allowing genuine pride to show in his voice. Just make sure you all come home. That's an order, Captain. The ghost of a smile touched Michael's features, the first since the call began. Yes, sir. As the communication time neared its end, William felt the weight of words unsaid pressing against his chest alongside his physical ailments. One question burned in his mind, but he hesitated to ask it directly. Michael seemed to sense his father's unasked question. "I've never regretted my choice, sir," he said quietly. "Not even knowing the risks, some things are worth doing despite the cost." The echo of William's own philosophy spoken in his son's voice created an unexpected connection between them. Not reconciliation, not yet, but a recognition of shared values beneath their differences. "Your deployment window is 10 days out," William noted as they prepared to end the call. "The Vanguard systems will be operational before you cross the border. I give you my word." "I never doubted that, sir," Michael replied, offering a crisp salute as the connection prepared to terminate. "If you're overseeing the project, it will be done right." The screen went dark, leaving William alone with the realization that despite their years of distance, his son still held faith in him, a faith he was now racing against time and his failing health to justify. As he exited the communications room, Reynolds waited in the corridor, her expression suggesting urgent developments. "Colonel, we have a situation," she said without preamble. "The prototype's fire control system is showing intermittent failures during final integration testing. We've traced it to manufacturing defects and components that were replaced after the sabotage incident." "Deliberate quality issues?" Harrington asked, immediately alert despite his fatigue. "It appears so. The components passed initial inspection, but contain microscopic stress fractures that only manifest under full operational loads. Rodriguez is implementing replacements, but it will delay final testing by at least 48 hours. Another setback, potentially pushing deployment dangerously close to the 4th Brigade's movement into the combat zone." Harrington fought back the frustration, focusing instead on solutions. "What's our contingency?" "We can begin crew training on the simulator systems while Rodriguez completes the hardware replacements," Reynolds suggested. "It's not ideal, but it maintains our overall timeline if the replacement components perform as expected." "Do it," Harrington approved, "and implement additional quality control protocols for all components. Assume attempted sabotage until proven otherwise." As they walked toward the main facility, Harrington briefed Reynolds on the outcomes from the Pentagon hearing. "We have production authorization and Wilson has been removed from the project. Black Sphere's involvement is restricted pending investigation outcomes." "That's significant progress," Reynolds acknowledged, "but they won't give up easily. Too much money and influence at stake." "We just need enough time to get the first units deployed," Harrington reminded her. "Once the Vanguard proves itself in combat, political opposition will become much harder to maintain." Reynolds nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "There's something else you should know. Medical sent a priority message regarding your evaluation requirements. They're insisting on comprehensive cardiac assessment within 24 hours or immediate removal from command authority." The bureaucratic noose tightening exactly as Martinez had warned. "Delay tactics?" "I've pushed back citing operational urgency, but they're escalating to Martinez's level. I think someone's applying significant pressure." Black Sphere's counterattack, as predicted. Unable to stop Phoenix directly after the sabotage evidence, they were attempting to remove Harrington from command, likely hoping to install someone more amenable to delays or modifications. "Schedule the minimum required assessment that won't trigger automatic removal," Harrington decided. "I'll comply with basic requirements while maintaining operational authority." "That might buy another 72 hours at most," Reynolds cautioned. "The medical concerns are legitimate, Colonel. Your cardiac indicators are well outside acceptable parameters." Harrington knew she was right. Each day brought increasing pain and pressure, symptoms he controlled with medication and sheer willpower rather than proper treatment. But proper treatment would mean hospitalization and surgery options incompatible with completing the mission. 72 hours gets us through final testing and initial production, he calculated. After that, the project has enough momentum to continue without my direct oversight if necessary. Reynolds clearly wanted to object further, but recognized the determination behind his decision. Instead, she updated him on the production schedule as they entered the main facility, where the Vanguard prototype stood surrounded by technical teams implementing final modifications. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Harrington divided his time between overseeing technical implementations, reviewing training protocols, and managing the minimal medical assessments necessary to maintain command authority. Each day brought new challenges, component failures, personnel issues, resource allocation conflicts, but also incremental progress toward operational readiness. By the third day, Rodriguez had successfully replaced the compromised fire control components, allowing final integration testing to proceed. The results vindicated their perseverance. The Vanguard system achieved 92% effectiveness against simulated hypersonic threats, far exceeding the 75% minimum requirement for combat deployment. Production had begun on the first operational units, with round-the-clock manufacturing at secure facilities. The compressed timeline meant that each system would be tested and deployed immediately upon completion, with training occurring simultaneously rather than sequentially. Throughout these critical days, Harrington pushed his body beyond reasonable limits, ignoring increasingly severe warning signs from his damaged heart. Medication masked the worst symptoms, allowing him to function professionally while concealing the deterioration from all but the most observant colleagues. Reynolds noticed, of course, but respected his choice to prioritize the mission over his health. On the morning of this fourth day, as Harrington reviewed final production quality metrics with the manufacturing team, his phone signaled an urgent message from Martinez. Medical authorization revoked effective immediately. Security en route to escort you to Walter Reed for mandatory evaluation. Delay them if you can. I'm working channels, but decision comes from above. Black Sphere's influence had finally overcome the procedural delays. With production underway and testing successful, removing Harrington now wouldn't stop Phoenix deployment entirely, but could potentially create delays and modifications that would leave the 4th Brigade temporarily vulnerable upon arrival in theater. Harrington quickly located Reynolds and Rodriguez, briefing them on the situation in the privacy of the secure conference room. "How long before security arrives?" Rodriguez asked, immediately grasping the implications. 2 hours at most, Harrington estimated. Commercial flight from Andrews to El Paso, then ground transport here. "That's not much time," Reynolds observed. "What do you need from us?" Harrington considered their options carefully. "Phoenix will continue without me. The production authorization is secure and the technical specifications are validated. My concern is potential interference in the training and deployment phases." Black Sphere still has influence with the acquisition staff, Rodriguez noted. They could push for safety modifications or extended evaluation periods that delay actual deployment. "Exactly," Harrington confirmed. "We need assurance that the existing configuration reaches Michael's unit as specified without last-minute changes." Reynolds understood immediately. "You want to accompany the first production units directly to Kuwait, bypassing potential interference. If the first systems are already in theater being installed on the 4th Brigade's tanks, retroactive modifications become nearly impossible to implement," Harrington confirmed. "That's going directly against medical orders and potentially violating military regulations," Rodriguez pointed out, though his tone suggested he was identifying obstacles rather than objecting to the plan. "Sometimes protecting American lives requires interpreting regulations creatively," Harrington replied. "I'm not asking either of you to risk your careers. This is my decision alone." Reynolds and Rodriguez exchanged glances, a silent communication between professionals who had worked intensely together toward a common goal. "The first 2 production units complete final testing in 90 minutes, Rodriguez reported. "Transport to Andrews is scheduled for 1800 hours, with military airlift to Kuwait departing at 2100. And security will arrive around 1500, Harrington calculated. "Not enough time to intercept the units before transport." "Not if they can't find you," Reynolds suggested. "The facility is large and complex. Security protocols for certain areas require specific clearances even for military police." The implication was clear. They would help delay the security team long enough for Harrington to accompany the first Vanguard units to Andrews and onward to Kuwait. "Once you're aboard of the military transport with the Vanguard systems, they can't easily remove you without delaying the equipment deployment," Rodriguez added. And with General Martinez aware of the situation, "He might run interference at the Pentagon level," Harrington concluded, "not preventing the medical evaluation entirely, but ensuring it happens after the critical systems reach theater." The plan was risky, potentially career-ending for all involved if it failed, but if successful, it would ensure the 4th Brigade received the life-saving Vanguard systems without last-minute interference or delays. "I'll handle the security team," Rodriguez volunteered. "Extensive safety briefings, elaborate checkout procedures, restricted area protocols, the full bureaucratic treatment. And I'll ensure the transport documentation lists you as the required technical escort for the initial deployment," Reynolds added. "Officially, the systems can't be transported without senior technical oversight due to classification levels." Harrington nodded gratitude, aware that both were placing their careers at risk to support his final mission. "I won't forget this. Just make sure those systems reach Captain Harrington's unit," Rodriguez replied simply. "That's all the thanks we need." As they implemented their plan, Harrington felt the familiar pressure in his chest intensifying. He took another pill, knowing he was exceeding the recommended dosage but seeing no alternative. Just a little longer, just long enough to ensure the vanguard reached Kuwait and the 4th Brigade. When security personnel arrived from Andrews, they found themselves navigating an administrative labyrinth orchestrated by Rodriguez. Essential safety briefings before entering certain areas, mandatory contamination procedures between sections, documentation requirements for classified spaces, each step meticulously justified by regulations but consuming precious time. Meanwhile, Harrington quietly accompanied the first 2 production Vanguard systems as they completed final testing and were prepared for transport. By the time security finally navigated the procedural obstacles and reached Harrington's office, he was already en route to Andrews with the critical equipment, official documentation identifying him as the required technical escort for the classified system's initial deployment. Reynolds' final message reached him as the transport plane prepared for departure. Security filing protests, but Martinez has temporarily blocked medical removal orders citing critical national security requirements. Safe travels, Colonel. Make it count. As the C-17 transport lifted into the evening sky, Harrington watched the lights of Washington recede below, much as he had watched Fort Knox diminish when this mission began. The parallels weren't lost on him. Completion of the circle, one final flight to ensure his son and countless other American soldiers would have the protection they deserved. The pressure in his chest had become a constant companion, no longer responding adequately to medication. He knew the risks of international flight with his condition, particularly without medical supervision. But some missions justified any personal risk. This was one of them. 8,000 miles to Kuwait, 24 hours of flight time with refueling stops. The Vanguard system secured in the cargo hold behind him, representing America's best defense against the Cauldron threat. And beyond Kuwait, the border where Michael would soon lead his tank company into harm's way. One final mission, one last chance to ensure that history did not repeat itself. Even if it cost William Harrington his life, he would see it through to completion. Chapter 9. Legacy of Steel. The sun beat down mercilessly on Camp Beering, Kuwait, the temperature already approaching 110 degrees despite the early morning hour. Harrington stood in the shadows of the maintenance hangar, watching as the first Vanguard system was mounted onto an M1A2 Abrams tank. The integration process was proceeding smoothly under Rodriguez's supervision, the master sergeant having arrived on a separate transport with the technical installation team. Against all medical advice and several direct orders, Harrington had completed the journey to Kuwait, his determination overcoming both bureaucratic obstacles and his deteriorating physical condition. Each breath now brought sharp pain, and dizziness threatened whenever he exerted himself. But he concealed these symptoms from the soldiers around him through decades of practiced military discipline. Captain Michael Harrington stood nearby, observing the installation with professional interest. Father and son had maintained formal military protocols since William's arrival, their personal relationship subordinated to the operational requirements of preparing a combat unit for deployment. The targeting radar integrates with your existing systems while maintaining independent tracking capability, William explained, gesturing toward the distinctive low-profile turret being secured to the tank's chassis. This allows simultaneous engagement of ground and air threats without compromising either capability. Michael nodded, understanding. What's the operational radius of the defensive envelope? Approximately 600 meters effective range against hypersonic threats, nearly 2 kilometers against conventional air threats. When deployed in formation, 3 Vanguard-equipped tanks can create interlocking defensive zones protecting the entire company. The technical briefing continued as installation progressed, both men finding comfortable ground in the professional exchange. Only occasionally did their conversation hint at the personal connection beneath their shared ranks and responsibilities. Your mother would have hated this, William observed during a brief pause, watching his son's company preparing for imminent combat deployment. Both of us in the same war zone, commanding armored units. Michael's expression softened momentarily. She understood duty, even when she didn't like where it took us. Yes, William agreed, better than either of us deserved. The simple acknowledgement of shared loss created a moment of connection before they returned to the operational briefing. As installation neared completion, Rodriguez approached with an update. First system integration complete, sir. Diagnostics show all parameters within specified tolerances. Ready for initial crew training. Excellent work, Sergeant, William acknowledged. Captain, select your first crew for familiarization training. We'll run basic operational drills this afternoon, followed by live fire exercises tomorrow. Michael nodded and moved to brief his waiting tank commanders, leaving William alone with Rodriguez. How many systems will reach us before deployment? The sergeant asked quietly, aware of the tight timeline they faced. 6 confirmed, with 4 more possible if production maintains current pace, William replied. Enough to protect the lead elements of the battalion, but not full coverage. Better than nothing, Rodriguez observed pragmatically, especially if deployed strategically at formation boundaries. William agreed, though both men understood the mathematics of incomplete coverage. Some tanks would cross the border without vanguard protection, their crews vulnerable to the cauldron threat despite all their efforts. Any word from Washington? William asked, knowing Rodriguez maintained communication with Reynolds at the production facility. General Martinez has temporarily blocked further action on your medical situation, citing critical national security requirements. But it won't last once the systems are operational here. There's already discussion of sending a medical evacuation team to assist you back to Walter Reed. As expected, William acknowledged. We knew this was likely a one-way trip for me. Rodriguez studied him with professional concern. With respect, sir, you look like hell. How bad is it? Bad enough, William admitted, seeing no point in deceiving someone as observant as Rodriguez. The flight didn't help, but I'll hold together long enough to see the training completed. And after that? William shrugged slightly. After that doesn't matter. The mission will be accomplished whether I'm here to see it or not. The afternoon proceeded with initial crew training, Michael's tank commanders quickly adapting to the Vanguard's capabilities. William observed with professional pride, noting the efficiency and focus his son had instilled in his unit. These weren't garrison soldiers, but combat-ready professionals preparing for a high-risk deployment with appropriate seriousness. As the desert sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the training grounds, Michael approached his father with an unexpected request. Sir, my crew would be honored if you'd join us for evening meal at the company area. Nothing formal, just standard mess fare, but the men would appreciate hearing from the officer who developed the system that might save their lives. The invitation represented more than a professional courtesy. Both men recognized it as Michael's first step toward personal reconciliation. William accepted with simple gratitude, and that evening found himself seated among his son's tank crews, sharing experiences and insights from his decades of armored warfare. The informal gathering gradually shifted from technical discussions about the Vanguard system to broader reflections on armored combat, lessons learned from past conflicts, and the unique brotherhood that existed among tank crews. William found himself recounting experiences from Desert Storm and other deployments, stories he had rarely shared even with fellow officers. The tank isn't just a weapons platform, he told the attentive crew members. It's a home in combat, the place where 4 men live and fight as one organism. You depend on each other more completely than in almost any other combat role. Each man has to know instinctively what the others will do in any situation. The younger soldiers nodded understanding, many having already experienced the unique bonds formed within tank crews during training and previous deployments. Michael sat quietly, listening to his father speak with an authority and openness he rarely displayed in family settings. As the gathering concluded, William found himself momentarily alone with Michael in the company commander's small office, a rare opportunity for private conversation away from the formal military environment. Your men are well trained, William observed, focused, professional, ready for what's coming. They're good soldiers, Michael agreed, the best I've served with, which makes it all the more important to bring them home safely. The comment hung between them, acknowledging the deadly serious purpose behind the Vanguard deployment. After a moment, Michael continued with unexpected directness. Why didn't you tell me Hellhound was sabotaged? That the men who died weren't lost due to equipment failure or your decisions? The question caught William off guard. How did you learn about that? Dr. Reynolds sent me the technical analysis, Michael explained. She thought I should know the truth before deployment. William absorbed this information, surprised but not displeased by Reynolds' initiative. The evidence was only recently discovered during Phoenix development. We identified similar sabotage patterns in both projects, suggesting a long-term effort to prevent effective tank-based air defense systems from reaching deployment. And Colonel Wilson was involved? He's under investigation, along with certain elements within Black Sphere Technologies. The full scope remains unclear, whether driven by corporate profit motives or something more sinister. Michael considered this information with the careful analysis of a combat officer. So for 30 years, you carried responsibility for deaths that weren't your fault, that were deliberately caused by someone else. Command responsibility doesn't work that way, William replied. Regardless of sabotage, they were my men. The mission was under my authority. The outcome remains my responsibility, even if the causes were beyond my control. The principle was foundational to military leadership. A commander owned both successes and failures under their command, regardless of contributing factors. Michael understood this perspective, though his expression suggested he didn't fully agree with its application in this specific case. Is that why you pushed yourself to the breaking point for Phoenix? He asked. To make amends for something that wasn't your fault? William considered the question carefully before responding. Partly, but primarily because I couldn't bear the thought of you facing a threat we could have countered if someone had just tried harder. Some burdens you never want your children to carry. The simple honesty of the statement bridged more distance between them than any elaborate reconciliation attempt could have achieved. Michael nodded slowly, recognizing both the professional duty and paternal concern that had driven his father's actions. I need to ask you something else, Michael said after a moment. Something Dr. Reynolds mentioned in her communication. Go ahead. Your heart condition. How bad is it really? William had expected this question eventually, though he'd hoped to avoid it until after the Vanguard systems were fully operational. Significant coronary artery disease, worsening despite medication and previous interventions. The doctors at Walter Reed were recommending immediate bypass surgery before I left Washington. And instead, you flew 8,000 miles to a combat zone, Michael observed, his tone balanced between professional concern and personal worry, against direct medical orders. Some missions justify any personal risk, William replied simply. Michael's expression suggested he understood this perspective all too well, perhaps recognizing in himself the same willing self-sacrifice that had defined his father's career. The realization seemed to soften something in his demeanor, allowing him to ask the question he'd avoided for years. Why did you object so strongly when I chose Armor Branch? Was it really concern for my safety or something else? The directness deserved equal honesty in return. Both, William admitted. I knew firsthand the physical and psychological toll of armored combat, the isolation, the intensity, the responsibility for crew lives. But I also recognized myself in your choice, the same drive, the same willingness to bear ultimate responsibility. And that recognition frightened me because I'd seen where that path led. To what? Career success, respect from your peers, making a difference when it mattered most? To lying awake remembering the faces of men who died under your command, William answered quietly. To a marriage strained by repeated deployments and constant relocations. To missing your child's formative years while serving in distant war zones. To physical ailments from decades inside steel boxes, breathing recycled air, and absorbing concussive forces. The uniform comes with costs that recruitment posters don't mention. The honesty clearly affected Michael, who had experienced enough combat already to recognize the truth in his father's assessment. Yet you never left the service, despite those costs. No, William acknowledged, because some things are worth doing despite the cost. The same reason you gave during our video call. The parallel between them hung in the air, both an acknowledgement of their shared values and a recognition of the inevitable sacrifices those values demanded. Neither man fully articulated the reconciliation occurring between them, but something fundamental had shifted, allowing each to see the other more clearly than before. Their conversation was interrupted by a medical officer arriving at the company area, his expression suggesting urgency. Colonel Harrington, I've been ordered to conduct an immediate health assessment. Your cardiac indicators are showing concerning patterns on your remote monitoring device. The monitoring bracelet William had been required to wear since arriving in Kuwait had apparently transmitted warning data to medical staff. His condition was deteriorating faster than anticipated, likely accelerated by the physical stress of international travel and the intense desert heat. I have operational responsibilities that take priority, Doctor, William replied formally. The assessment can wait until morning. The medical officer stood his ground with professional determination. With respect, sir, that's not a request. I have direct orders from Theater Command, backed by Pentagon Medical Authority. You're to report to the field hospital immediately for comprehensive cardiac evaluation. Michael intervened diplomatically. Doctor, we're conducting critical pre-deployment training with new defensive systems. Perhaps you could conduct a preliminary assessment here, And if urgent intervention isn't required, allow my father, I mean Colonel Harrington, to complete tomorrow's essential training before full evaluation. The compromise was reasonable enough to give the medical officer pause. After a moment's consideration, he agreed to conduct a field assessment while notifying the hospital of a delay. When they were briefly alone again before the examination, Michael spoke quietly to his father. "You shouldn't have come, not in your condition. The training teams could have handled the deployment." "Perhaps," William conceded, "but I needed to see it through, to know with certainty that you and your men would have the protection I couldn't provide for my own crew 30 years ago." Michael's expression softened with understanding. "Some ghosts never stop haunting us." "No," William agreed, "but sometimes we get a chance to ensure they don't claim new victims. That's enough." The medical assessment confirmed what William already knew. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, requiring immediate intervention. The officer insisted on transport to the field hospital for comprehensive testing and likely emergency measures, but agreed to delay until morning at William's insistence, given the critical nature of the Vanguard training program. That night, alone in his temporary quarters, William reviewed the training schedule for the following day, ensuring all essential elements would be covered regardless of his potential absence. The live fire exercises were particularly critical, demonstrating the Vanguard's effectiveness against drone targets, simulating the cauldron penetrators. As he completed the preparations, another episode of chest pain struck, more severe than previous occurrences. The medication provided temporary relief, but left him with the certainty that his time was running dangerously short. The doctors might be right about the need for immediate intervention, but he remained determined to see the training through to completion first. Morning arrived with unforgiving desert heat already building as the tank crews prepared for live fire exercises. William briefed the assembled commanders on the Vanguard's engagement protocols, emphasizing both its capabilities and limitations. "The system is not infallible," he cautioned. "It provides significant protection against air threats, but operational awareness remains essential. Maintain standard defensive formations, utilize terrain features for concealment, and never rely exclusively on technological solutions in combat environments." The practical wisdom resonated with the experienced tank commanders, who recognized the balance between leveraging new technology and maintaining fundamental tactical discipline. As the briefing concluded, the tanks moved to their designated positions on the firing range, the Vanguard systems prominently visible on the lead vehicles. William observed from the range control position, monitoring both the exercise preparations and his own increasingly concerning symptoms. The medical team would arrive soon to transport him to the hospital, but he was determined to witness the culmination of the project first, the moment when Michael and his crews would see firsthand the Vanguard's effectiveness against the threats awaiting them across the border. The exercise began with target drones launched from multiple positions, simulating both conventional and high-speed threats. The Vanguard-equipped tanks responded immediately, their targeting systems acquiring and tracking the approaching drones with precision. When the targets entered the engagement envelope, the twin 35mm cannons roared to life, creating defensive spheres of proximity-fused ammunition that effectively neutralized the simulated threats. Michael's tank, leading the formation, demonstrated particularly effective target prioritization, engaging multiple threats in rapid sequence without compromising defensive coverage. William watched with professional pride as his son implemented the tactical principles they had discussed, maximizing the Vanguard's effectiveness through intelligent deployment and crew coordination. As the exercise reached its climax with simultaneous engagement of multiple high-speed targets, William felt a crushing pressure in his chest, far more intense than previous episodes. He managed to maintain his professional demeanor as the exercise concluded successfully, all simulated threats neutralized by the Vanguard systems. The tank commanders gathered for debriefing, their expressions reflecting confidence in the new defensive capabilities. Michael led the discussion, demonstrating command presence and technical understanding that would serve his unit well in the approaching deployment. William observed quietly, conserving his rapidly diminishing strength. He had accomplished what he came to do. The Vanguard systems were operational, the crews were effectively trained, and Michael's unit would cross the border with protection against the cauldron threat. The mission was complete. As the debriefing concluded, the promised medical team arrived, their expressions suggesting they understood the seriousness of his condition even before conducting formal assessment. William allowed them to lead him toward the waiting ambulance, pausing only briefly to exchange a final word with his son. The Vanguard performed as designed, he noted professionally. Your crews adapted to the new systems remarkably quickly. Michael nodded, maintaining the formal military demeanor appropriate for the public setting, though his eyes revealed deeper concern. Thank you for seeing this through, sir. My men and I appreciate what you've accomplished here. William hesitated briefly before adding more quietly, I'm proud of you, Michael. Not just as an officer, but as a man. You've become more than I ever hoped. The simple statement, delivered without dramatic context or elaborate reconciliation narrative, seemed to affect Michael more deeply than any lengthy emotional discussion might have. He straightened slightly, his professional composure maintained, but his eyes communicating understanding of both the spoken words and the unspoken sentiment behind them. Safe travels, sir, he replied formally, though the slight emphasis on safe conveyed personal concern beyond professional courtesy. We'll put your work to good use. As the medical team helped William into the ambulance, his last view was of Michael returning to his tank crews, already refocusing on the deployment preparations that would occupy the coming days. The contrast between them was striking, the older officer departing for medical intervention, while the younger prepared to lead men into combat, a symbolic passing of responsibility from one generation to the next. The field hospital confirmed what William had already known, a major cardiac event requiring immediate surgery. As medical staff prepared him for emergency treatment, he maintained calm acceptance of both the procedures and their uncertain outcome. He had completed his mission. Whatever happened now was secondary to that essential accomplishment. 1 month later, a fully recovered William Harrington stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, leaning slightly on a cane as General Martinez pinned the Distinguished Service Medal to his uniform. The ceremony marked his official retirement after 40 years of service, delayed by both his medical treatment and the successful deployment of the Vanguard systems to combat units in theater. The citation lauded his leadership in developing critical defensive technology for armored forces, specifically noting that the Vanguard system had already proven its effectiveness in combat operations, successfully countering cauldron attacks against the 4th Armored Brigade during their initial border crossing operations. What the citation didn't mention was the personal cost paid for that success, the near-fatal cardiac event, the emergency surgery, the weeks of painful recovery. Nor did it mention the ongoing investigation into Colonel Wilson and Black Sphere Technologies, which had already uncovered evidence of both corporate espionage and potential collaboration with foreign intelligence services. As the ceremony concluded, Martinez approached William privately. The investigation is expanding, he informed his old friend quietly. Black Sphere executives are facing potential espionage charges, and Wilson has agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration during sentencing. The sabotage trail leads back decades, potentially explaining numerous failed defense programs beyond Hellhound. William nodded at acknowledgement, but found his attention drawn more to the personal message that had arrived that morning, a brief communication from Michael, currently deployed with his tank company. Vanguard performed flawlessly during engagement yesterday. 3 cauldron attacks defeated, all crews safe. Your legacy in steel, some burdens could never be fully set aside. The faces of those lost under his command would remain with William Harrington until his final days. But alongside those painful memories now stood the knowledge that his final mission had succeeded, protecting his son and countless other American soldiers from threats that might otherwise have claimed them. As he departed the Pentagon for the last time, uniform replaced by civilian attire but bearing unchanged, William reflected on the meaning of 40 years in service, not the medals or promotions or ceremonial recognition, but the lives impacted, both those lost under his command and those saved through his final efforts. 1 month later at Fort Knox, William stood beside the newly installed Vanguard display at the Patton Museum. The exhibit chronicled the development of American tank-based air defense, from the early concepts inspired by German Flakpanzer designs, through the ill-fated Hellhound program, and finally to the successful Phoenix Project and Vanguard deployment. A special section acknowledged the recently uncovered sabotage of both programs, presenting the full historical record with appropriate security considerations. Visitors could now understand that the Hellhound failure had resulted from deliberate action rather than technical limitations or command decisions, an important correction to the historical record William had carried alone for 30 years. As he studied the exhibit, a class of young officer candidates entered the museum, their instructor guiding them toward the armored warfare displays. William stepped aside, allowing them space to observe and learn, while listening quietly to the instructor's explanation of the Vanguard system's importance to modern armored operations. The development of effective mobile air defense represents one of the most significant advancements in tank warfare since composite armor, the instructor explained. It fundamentally altered the vulnerability equation that had disadvantaged ground forces against air threats since World War II. One of the young candidates noticed William observing them, perhaps recognizing him from the exhibit photographs. He offered a respectful nod, which William returned with quiet acknowledgement. These would be the officers commanding American armored forces in the coming decades, building upon the foundations established by previous generations. Outside the museum, tanks from various eras lined the approach road, including a newly added M1A2 Abrams fitted with the Vanguard system. William paused beside it briefly, placing a hand on the cold metal that represented both America's continuing military evolution and his personal legacy, a legacy of steel stretching from past to future, from father to son, from one generation of warriors to the next.